Hello, everybody. I know that in the chat, I've just had a look, and there's some people I don't know yet, which is lovely. So please keep commenting. And there's and Margaret's there, which is good. So I know Margaret really well. But this is Book Songs Live the Magic, and this is a really special live. I do lives all the time now, and I've got my fortnightly live with Dave, which you will know if you're regular to the channel. But that's a little bit kind of mad and relatively light in its content. Tonight is going to be a little bit more in depth. I think we've got my mate Johno here, and we've been friends for a long time. So we met teaching, met like about 16 years ago, and we've been good friends since then. And Johno goes to see my band, don't you?
I've completely forgot. I've got my merch on from earlier. I meant to put your Bemis t-shirt on. I literally meant to be wearing some of your merch. No, I did. I saw it this morning in my t-shirt drawer. I was like, I've got to wear my Bemis top, and I've bloody forgotten. So you had to invite me on again, and I'll do that.
Okay. Well, if it goes well, this could be a regular occurrence. So we'll see. And Jono's got a fantastic chat. Well, he's got two YouTube channels actually, but we're probably going to be bouncing more off the ATB geopolitics one, aren't we, more than a tippling philosopher? But
yeah,
they're both fantastic channels, and you've got to check them out. He's extremely active. I mean, do you do a day one every day?
I do about 4 every day. Sometimes I have on times because I also do some breaking news ones which are much shorter, but then I do long ones, and sometimes I've produced like 6 videos a day. And it's just because I'm the sort of person where if I've got something in my head, right, I've got to get it out there. And if I'm thinking about it, I'm like, well, I've got to tell everyone about this because I'm thinking about it, and so they need to. And it just so my videos just end up being a reflection of just the inner workings of my brain on a daily basis.
But the way that your channel works, if you did leave it too long, it would be difficult, wouldn't it? Because
it's very topical.
You're gonna, and you'll lose some of the stuff you need to say, some of the stuff that in connecting the dots. Because we'll talk a little bit about how the dots are connected, and if you don't cover everything, then you've missed some things out that the narrative isn't so strong, isn't it?
Yeah, and only a few of my videos are evergreen, which means that you could watch them in 3 years' time and they'll still be relevant. Actually, most of mine are just reporting the news and connecting the dots. But that analysis is rooted in the today, and like this has happened and that's happened, and so I have to say it now or I'll never say it. And I've kind of got this like, I don't want to say like OCD brain or whatever, because it's not, but I've got this thing where it's like if I put the work in my brain into thinking these things, and if I've taken down all the URLs that I'm going to, all my websites that I'm going to discuss, or my links, then like I can't waste that. It has to come out. So I end up just effectively doing far too much content.
And you, far too much is a strong word, but you also use videos as well. Like, so if something's come up on the news, you'll actually watch it and analyze it while it's on the screen, won't you? Which is really cool. That's a good thing to do. And obviously, you do lots of interviews with people. You've had interviews with journalists and people from the Ukraine.
Yeah, I've just interviewed Kaylin Robertson, who is a journalist. Did a live stream tonight. He's just made a documentary, so he's somewhere in Europe doing an investigative bit of journalism. He couldn't say where he was, but I just interviewed him tonight, and that was absolutely fascinating. It always is. I've spoken to him a number of times. So I do all sorts of different content.
Yeah. But I think it's always important. Do you know, what you're doing is really important. So. I
like to think so. Not only because you put a lot of effort into what you do, and I'm so obsessed with it, and I find it important to know about this stuff. And it's quite nice, I guess, to hear other people say, "Look, you are my daily routine. I wake up and I watch this video, and then I watch that video. I have my cup of coffee, and it's really important what you do. Not because I want to make myself feel better, but I just want to be useful to the world, right? I don't want to do this for my own benefit. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to. I don't want to do all these videos because I like the sound of my own voice. I want to do these videos because I want this to matter, to make a difference, and to have utility for the world. I want to, we all in our own kind of weird way, I guess, like you want to make the world a better place. Hopefully no one sits there and says, I want to make the world a worse place. I want it to suck because of my existence. I'd like to make, and I don't know if that's a bit self-aggrandizing, but you want to matter and you want to make the world in your own little way just a little bit better.
Well, I think if you think about the context of what you're doing, there's too many people doing the opposite. So there's people that think they're doing the right thing, but are clearly on the opposite side of the political spectrum. And you clearly know that there's so much of that you do want people to see what you're doing, because there's so little of what you and me, in a very humble way, is doing. Because I don't do this anywhere near as consistent or as well or as thorough as you do it. So, but people who are on our side of the spectrum, there's not enough of it, and part of that is because we're not welcomed onto the media as well, anyway, because that's an issue anyway. But it's also just that there are lots of people that it takes balls to say something controversial, and unfortunately, being, for example, anti-fascist is controversial now.
Who knew that you could don your British Army, American Army uniform in the Second World War and you'd be like, I am literally Antifa. I'm Antifa now, and I'm going to fight at the Battle of the Bulge. I'm going to go and fight those Nazis. And now Antifa's like, oh, can't be Antifa. Like, really? We can't be anti-fascist?
Yeah,
so
surely,
does that mean we're pro-fascist?
Yeah. Surely Antifa's basic.
It's just like, I thought it was a given that we were against fascism, and that's kind of weird. Is that we grew up in this time period when we were watching those films on TV, those kind of like World War II films, and we've grown up in being part of this culture of post World War II, and I wonder whether we're just starting to get to a point now in history in the world where that memory is dying off, as the people who were fighting in the Second World War are literally dying off. And now we're moving into a post stage where actually history moves in cycles where people have forgotten that. It's like, oh, have you thought about authoritarianism? Have you thought about that sounds cool. Have you seen this fascism thing? I might try that out.
It's two things. It's become a theory, so it's like 80 years ago, and it's something that people are kind of see it as a story, when it did happen, and it was it wasn't just the German Nazis, but all sorts of places. And also there's a disconnect as well, isn't there, that people don't see that as what's happening now, because it's now, and surely that can't happen now. So there's a disconnect as well with what's currently happening.
Well, yeah, I mean, one thing that really annoys me is that when people talk about fascism, I've done a couple of videos about how the US is literally embracing fascism. And I say, this is a definition of fascism. These are a couple of authors, analysts, historians look at what the pillars of fascism are. And this is what's going on in the US. This is what they're embracing. And these are the pillars that get you to fascism. And I'm like, so... yeah, this is looking to me very much like fascism. But then you get people saying, "Oh no, I hate the idea that fascism can only be people in brown shirts. That only if you're wearing an SS uniform can you be involved in fascism." Like, no, this is American fascism in the 21st century, and this is what it looks like. And I think because of that culture that we've been existing in post World War II, you think, well, fascism is only a kind of either a Hitler-esque or a Mussolini-esque type thing, and it can't have an iteration in the modern times.
And one of the big changes would have been the way that these oligarchs manipulate social media, which wouldn't have happened 80 years ago, 70 years, 60 years ago, 50 years ago. This is a 21st century thing, and this is how they've rose to power, if that's the right thing, but also maintains their the way that they kind of cloak everybody's eyes against what they're doing. And it's kind of subtle, but obviously it's not subtle to us, but it's subtle to a lot of people.
There's a lot of gaslighting going on. There's a lot of fooling people. There's a lot of lying. All of this. I was wondering how to go about talking about tonight, because I kind of want to talk about everything, and get into the idea that the disinformation is rife, that social media and media is being manipulated by nefarious actors and so on and so forth, and just wondering where to start and how to get into this. So I was thinking, like, first thing to maybe talk about is just demographics, if you don't mind. So sorry to my audience or the people that hear from my audience, because we've heard this like 100 times, but I often talk about, like, we're used to a national demographic looking like this, where you got old people at the top, and then, you know, age on the y-axis, and then, you know, number on the x-axis. And so you have, traditionally, very few people get old and then they die, and they're supported by a pretty sizable middle section who are paying taxes and working, and then they're having lots of children down here to replace them over time. And what's happened is that we've got better through science at living longer, right? And so the top has gone like that, right? And then we're not having as many children, so the bottom then goes like that. And then the children we do have more social needs, so things like special needs education, or like just general needs in society, social needs. So the cost of children's social care. I was speaking to my mate who's high up in Portsmouth City Council and saying, what are the biggest costs in the city council? He's like, children's social care, adult social care. I was like, okay. And that's the same. I'll speak to anyone in other councils. I've done this to other people, and it's a huge cost, right? So there are more old people, fewer younger people, but they're more expensive. And then fewer people in the middle getting replaced by the fewer young people to sustain by paying taxes for both this huge segment of society and this smaller but more expensive section of society. And that demographic shift is a problem, and it's a problem for all Western nations. It's going to be soon a very, very big problem for China. And so how do you solve this? Well, basically, but the problem is that we don't have an economic system that deals with this, that deals with stagnation in terms of population stagnation, or, you know, it's all about growing. Capitalism is all about growing. And because we don't have an alternative, then how do we deal with that? So you either have to have, one, loads of children, or two, immigration. Right. Problem is, people don't want loads of children because they're expensive. And we've got to this point in life where our infant mortality isn't like crazy bad. So you don't need to have loads of children to replace the ones that are going to die, quite literally. So we're modern, we think children expensive. So we only want one or two type thing, generally speaking. And then and you know, and we're living longer and all that. So we don't want lots of children, but then, okay, well, what's the other way around this demographic problem? Is, well, immigration. You get loads of working class males, particularly in, then, you know, fantastic. You can fit, you know, Germany kind of did this a little bit under Merkel, where they're like 800,000 people in, and it was all kind of controversial, but, you know, with a stagnating economy and a birth rate that, you know, isn't great, then that's one of your solutions. So, but the problem is, people don't like that, right? Many people don't like that, or they're told to not like it, or whatever. And immigration is something that's not seen as something we should go for at the moment. And so therefore, both of those options to solving that demographic problem are non-starters, and then that leads to economic hardship. And then you've got AI and all these other things.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about the whole sort of issue of tax being brought into the system, and how immigration is such a great source for that. And absolutely, but also those jobs that those immigrants are going to take, the kind of jobs they often take, your average sort of working class white person on the dole is not going to take those jobs. They don't want to do those jobs, you know. So that's a kind of an important part of the immigration debate, isn't it?
So a good place to look at this is the United States. So why is immigration like this? Goes back to Ronald Reagan's time, where he was like, we've got this problem with immigration. But actually, Republicans then were very pro-immigration. The reason why they're pro-immigration is, and the reason why it really hasn't been solved until Trump solved, caveats, is because it's part of their economic model, right? Which is, you know, there's a guy, another analyst of Ukraine, he often makes this point, and he says, look, if you really want to solve the immigration problem in the United States, then you punish the employer, because it's about supply and demand. So they come across a border because there are jobs to be had, and you can actually look at the correlation between influxes of migrants in the US and economic upturns or downturns, and it basically it reflects what's going on in the United States.
Right.
And so if you want to stop immigration, then you punish the employer. You say, if you employ an illegal immigrant, you're going to go to prison, and then you'd stop like the demand for those jobs. They wouldn't be the jobs there, so they wouldn't be flowing across the border. They're all going for the American dream, getting the job, etc., etc. But no one's ever done that because they recognize that actually you need those workers to do those jobs. Outside of the kind of social cohesion side of things, it's like we need people to work on the farms, we need people to work in hospitality, in the restaurants, and in construction and whatever. But if you really want to deal with it, that's what you do. So now for one to Trump, he's like, right, I'm going to solve this. So close down the border and we're going to deport 15 million migrants. The problem there is like, well, who does those jobs? So you're taking 15 million people outside of and I'm not really doing any analysis of whether immigration is good or bad from social points of view or anything else other than just pure numbers here. Like you take 15 million people out of an economy, and then you have a labor shortage, and a particular type of labor shortage, usually in the low skilled, low paid markets. And then what does that do when you have a labor shortage? Well, people are fighting for finite amount of jobs, and there's not enough people, so you have to offer higher wages to attract them in. So for example, it's like no one around here wants to go and pick fruit in the UK, so that's why before Brexit we had Eastern Europeans picking fruit here, because that was below us or whatever. So if we're not going to have Eastern Europeans, well, how do you get us to do those jobs? Well, you have to pay a higher wage until it gets to a point where you're like, I will do that actually. So that's inflationary. So that in the American situation, that getting rid of 15 million people, then putting tariffs on everyone else and having a trade war with the whole world, which tariffs are a tax on your own population, then which is inflationary. So you are having a double whammy there of inflationary pressures, which means that I think Trump's economic policies are pretty insane, and they're not really onshoring manufacturing either. That, in fact, manufacturing jobs have gone down for 7 straight months in a row in the United States. So, yeah, and then you start.
Is there a sense that, sorry to interrupt you, but is there a sense
sorry.
that is there a sense that those cracks will show before the midterm elections? Because it doesn't make any sense what he's doing, but it seems to be that the effects aren't being obvious yet.
So I was just watching a video just before I came on, actually, about some of the early signs of recession and the overvaluation of the stock market. Usually over history, the value of the stocks is like 10 times the revenue or something like that. Some kind of equation, and it's now 20 times. And so last time this happened was Y2K, and it's prime for a burst. And then you've got manufacturing jobs, and you've got AI being a threat to jobs, and all of these things. Yes. So what's very telling in the United States at the moment is that there's still a significant enough bunch of people who support everything Trump is doing, because he's got this cultic following. And it seems that the only thing that gets people to change their mind is hurting them in the pocket.
Yeah. And that's what got him the election as well, because of he promised them a benefit in the pocket. That was what he kept saying, wasn't it?
Well, A, he promised them a benefit, and B, there was this idea that inflation was bad. But this is where reality against perception is important to understand. And in my opinion, there's a big distortion in the United States, and you can understand it if you're only looking at yourselves. I was having a word on holiday to a couple of people who were like Democrat voters. Actually, they were either side before Trump got in. This newly married couple, and he was a Trump voter, she was a Harris voter, and they said, well, we cancel each other out, so they didn't vote. But they were quite politically active. But since Trump's come in, he had turned completely against Trump. He's like, no, this is all insane, and he voted on the economy. And I said to him in a swim up bar, I said to him, you do realize that, because he said inflation was terrible in the States and Biden hadn't blah 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 blah. And I was like, you do realize that in all the G7, G20 countries, the US had the best handle on inflation. And you do realize that your inflation, though you might have complained about it, was way lower than everyone else. And of course, when you're surrounded by US news, watching US stuff and watching your own price of bread go up and everything, you don't give a crap. You don't know what it's like around the rest of the world. But likewise, you don't understand the good stuff that the government has done in order to dampen down inflation to a manageable level. So inflation was a problem in the United States, but actually they had done the Inflation Reduction Act, the Chips and Science Act, loads of things to try and get manufacturing back in the US to get inflation down. And that had worked, and actually the jobs numbers were consecutive growth in jobs numbers for every single month of Biden's administration. And I'm not trying to be totally pro Biden here, but it's just this understanding that people in the US didn't realize where the US stood relative to everyone else. So if you don't understand where you stand relative to everyone else, and you just look at, oh, inflation's a bit bad here. Oh, that's the fault of the government. Screw you, Biden. We're going to vote you out of office. Whereas actually compare your inflation to Europe, to the UK, to Turkey, to Argentina. Those are two particularly bad places, but, around the world. And it's like, actually, you're doing a pretty damn good job of managing inflation. And so I think that's an interesting dimension to take into account.
Yeah. I'm gonna go on.
Well, yeah. So, like, to rewind back to where we were. So, we're talking that people will only change their minds when they're hurt in the pocket, particularly. Like it seems that ICE can nick people off the streets, and while independents and Democrats are very much swinging against Trump, he's underwater in all the polls in every single domain, right? But he's still got that core, like almost 40% of the population that think that that's acceptable, and I think they will only switch once.
But it's so un-American, isn't it? Like the ICE thing is so it's something they've never wanted to have that character to their country, and yet you're saying that there's still a 40% support.
I sort of disagree. I'd sort of disagree. So I need to look at the backing for this evidentially, but I was reading somewhere the other day that like 1 in 3 people are naturally authoritarian or tend towards supporting authoritarianism, which is like, oh, that's weird. Like, so you've got to fight hard for democracy. The point is, it doesn't come naturally to us. Like we're much more tend towards kings and dictators and single leaders and strongmen leaders. And so you have to fight really hard to explain how democracy is more beneficial. And then you've got to work hard to maintain democracy. And if you're not careful, it slips away. And so it takes an awful lot of work. So that was one element that is interesting. But also, if you look back in history with the United States, and I don't think it's any coincidence that in Trump 1.0 and now it's called the America First movement, right? But I don't know if you're aware of the initial America First movement in 1930s America.
Yeah.
So there's a chap called Charles Lindbergh, and you had this America First movement that was, we don't want to get involved in a war in Europe. We did blah 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 blah, and it was basically pretty very isolationist, very right wing, and very kind of, I would argue, it would tend towards authoritarianism had it really taken hold. And what happened is essentially Pearl Harbor happened, and that kind of switched everything around, and then the US gets involved. But if you saw some of the placards from the America First movement in the 30s, and then you see some of the Republican isolationists talking about Ukraine and not wanting to get involved in Europe, and that's their war, we don't want our boys, and go the same. I could show you the images of the placards of 1930s America First, early 40s America First movement, and you'd be like, okay. So that I think there is a history, but the
30s has come back across Europe as well. I mean,
it's cool again.
It's cool to hate foreigners. It's a bizarre thing that you're right, that it has definitely got links to that first America First movement, but also there's a real problem with loads of countries in Europe having a threat, like the possibility of a fascist government or a right-wing government getting into power. That's just, it's so 1930s. It's crazy.
So I mean, this is where, like, and this is not to say there aren't problems with immigration. I mean, immigration is going to be the battleground for the next 20 years, as far as I can work out. And that's just my speculation. But you've got wars going on, you've got instability going on around the world, and you've got climate change. So you're getting vast areas of land that are becoming less manageable in say, you know, areas of sub-Saharan Africa, or Saharan Africa, and then you have grievances that are manipulated, and I'll talk about that in a second. But essentially, people always like I moved to. You've been to my house. It's a nice neighborhood that I live in, right? We moved here to so that our kids could go to a better school and to kind of move up from where I used to live, right on the main road, dual carriageway in the middle of sort of Fareham, you know, that area, and then move to here. And it's like, that's a natural inclination to move to a better place for social mobility, for economic mobility, so that you have a better life for your kids.
Yeah,
like we do that internally, right, domestically in our countries, and it's a natural inclination for people to do that. And you know, when I'm at my most philosophical, I'm like, well, I didn't choose to be born in the UK. I didn't choose to be born to my parents. So it's a complete lottery that I was born into luckily into what a country that I think is absolutely fabulous, like comparatively speaking. And who am I to say, no, you can't come and access this because this is mine, when I did nothing to merit being born here. This is when I'm my most philosophical.
That's my problem with nationalism, that it's a complete fluke that you are who you are. Why, how can you be proud of something that somebody did 200 years ago when you didn't do it? So yeah, absolutely, it's a fluke.
But on the other hand, it's like, okay, but we do have national borders, and this is the way we do have the world set up, and you can't just have massive movement of people all over the place and it will be absolute chaos, and it's a rules-based order. And so you've got your pragmatics, and then you've got the, well, okay, I want to look after mine, that natural inclination to say, hang on, I am living here and this is my family and this is my area, and I, you know, we have that natural territorial intuition, right? And so you've got all these competing ideas going on, but suffice to say that I think immigration will be the biggest battleground for politics in the next 20 years, because it's going to be driven by a desire for people to and as it becomes easier to move as well. So like 100 years ago, it's very difficult to move around the world. Now it's very easy. You've got boats and planes and cars and trains.
But it might not be 20 years if the economic effects of kicking people out of a country start coming into effect, and people are like, actually, this was a stupid idea, and you know, multiculturalism becomes trendy again. It's a bizarre thing to say, but you know, it might not be 20. I don't know. It could be 20.
I don't.
So like 10 years. I don't know.
So the problem. So if you want to solve like economic migration, then you need to make the places that people are coming from more attractive to live in, right? So if you're living in, I don't know, wherever, it doesn't matter where it is, wherever in the world, and your wages aren't as good, and you see UK or Italy or France, I mean, we think we got it bad in the UK. Our press tells us that migration is worse in the UK, but actually France, Italy and Germany have asylum seeking numbers that are way bigger than ours. But our press will tell you they're all coming to the UK. They're going through France, they're going through Italy, and they're through Germany to get to the UK. The reality is very different.
But can I just say, this might be a tangent, but I'd say that the worst media outlet in this country that seems to be attracting so many viewers and loyal followers is GB News.
Oh yeah, we'll come to that. Park that.
So
but you know, it's not to say that you know, so it's not to say that immigration though isn't a problem. We have underfunded services that we need to put funding in, and there are going to be pressures on those services and whatnot, but essentially it's going to be the big battleground. And then what you have are people like China, Russia, North Korea and Iran, but we'll concentrate on Russia. That's where my expertise is. So for a long time now, they understand that fear sells. You know, you look at the 2024 November election for the US presidency, and literally Kamala Harris was campaigning on joy. Like literally that word was one of the themes of the campaign. And Trump was campaigning on immigration. They're going to come and take this, they're going to take that. You know, the Republicans have always been much better at campaigning emotively, and it's a bit like in the UK, like with the Conservatives, they know how to scare you or you know.
Well, it was like running a campaign on Americans becoming victims, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
victimize
grievance
the average
narratives.
American.
Yeah, and but it's so in the Republicans have been brilliant at campaigning. It's all like they're coming to kill your babies, they're coming to take your guns, they're coming to like all of these things, but they're really emotive and actually they motivate you to vote, right? And successfully so. Whereas the Democrats all been like, oh, have you seen our 10 policies that we're gonna, the same with Labour. Do you remember when Ed Miliband was against Boris Johnson? Boris Johnson campaigned on get Brexit done. 3 words, that was it. Like when you're like, well, have you got any policies there? It's like, yeah, get Brexit done. No, give us some detail. Yeah, get Brexit done. Okay. And then Ed Miliband had like a policy list as long as his arm. And it was really detailed, way too much stuff. And it's like, actually, I understand why people like simple, effective.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So
and Reform are doing the same thing. Reform
Yeah.
have got a very simple message that they know it's going to be effective, and most of it's lies, but it doesn't matter because it's getting through.
Okay, I've got a bit to say on that. But I want to go back to the Russia thing. So Russia then know that this is a really divisive subject. Like immigration is very divisive. What Russia want, what Vladimir Putin wants, and what Donald Trump want are identical things. They want the breakup of the EU. So the US is not the enemy of Russia. I know Americans might think it because of the Cold War, and it probably was, but right now the EU geographically closer and the unity, and they've stolen these countries away from the Russian influence and so on and so forth. The EU, the breakup of the EU is exactly what Vladimir Putin wants, and it's what Trump wanted in Trump 1.0 and pretty much in 2.0. He keeps calling the EU nasty, and he says it was started to try and like ruin us. He keeps saying this stuff about the EU, which is complete bollocks. But he wants it broken up because he has what's many people recognize as a transactional nature, a zero-sum game nature. So Trump looks at the world and says, right, if any other country gains, it is at our loss. So zero sum. So the idea is that if they go up, we go down, and there's zero sum. If you add those two together, you get to zero. And if we go up, they go down. And so he looks at the EU and says, well, they're a competitor. And if they do well, and if they're getting together and being a trade bloc and very powerful, rather than saying, well, we could work together and we have a positive sum game where both of us gain, he's a zero sum game, which is like, if they do well, we do badly. And so therefore, they are just as much as a competitor as China and as Russia. And I see no, because he doesn't think in terms of morality or in terms of geopolitical strategizing. He's like, everyone's a competitor. He's basically a real estate mogul that has become a president. So he looks around New York and he says, right, all you bastards are competitors with me, and I need to screw you all over to make me successful. And also the people that I'm employing, all these, I'm going to screw them over by not paying them and the contracts. And anyway, that's a kind of the mentality he takes into being the president. So like, we are a competitor to him, and he would like to see the EU destroyed, which is why he supported the UK coming out of the EU and supported Brexit just as Putin does. So anyway, Putin wants to break up of the EU. He sees that's why he supported Brexit, and that's why the Russian disinformation campaigning this is when it was really starting to get going. And there's all the evidence that you like about this. In fact, the previous government refused to release their reports on Russian interference in the Brexit election, and they still haven't released it. And I don't know if Labour can get hold of it. That needs to be released, right? Because we don't know the extent of the influence. We know from social media, Facebook and Twitter and others have admitted that Russia was rife online, peddling. And what they do is it's not that they make stuff up necessarily, or they do make stuff up, but they also take grievances like Brexit and immigration, and they amplify it to make it seem much bigger than it really is, much worse than it really is. So they take immigration, and you might have genuine concerns about immigration that we could agree on. We could say, you're right, this is a challenge to immigration. Like, I am split on immigration because I understand from a philosophical point of view that what we said earlier, but also I understand from a pragmatic and social cohesion point of view that you can't just have people like moving through borders willy-nilly all the time, right? So somewhere in the middle, you've got a sensible like place to settle. Putin takes these ideas and says, right, this is really divisive. It is clear that we can scare people with some of the worst aspects of of immigration, and will just amplify that message. And that's what they do. They take grievances that exist and they amplify them until that's all you see. And then you've got now Elon Musk that agrees with all of these people and agrees about immigration because he's one of these South African tech oligarchs and believes in techno-fascism, and that's a technical term. That him and Peter Thiel and David Sachs and Mark Andreessen, etc., it's like the algorithms on Twitter at the moment are doing exactly the same as what Putin wants, and it's what kind of Trump wants, really, which is the populist right to rise in the EU, because they like the populist right. The Heritage Foundation, we could talk about that. We can talk about who is really running the government in the US, and having these right-wing populist parties to pull the EU apart is exactly what both of those sides want. And that is what's happening in Europe, and it is taking grievances that are perhaps genuine grievances that have some validity, and then exploding them to a level that is destructive.
Because I was going to say, during that whole Brexit debate, in inverted commas, there were the people that were pro Brexit, pro EU, the people that were pro EU, if they knew anything about the EU, they knew it was flawed, right? But even though it was flawed, if you wanted to stay in the EU, because I wanted to stay in the EU, I studied the EU. So when I did this course that got me back into university, I did a course on the EU. So I felt like it was just before Brexit, and I felt like I knew what I was talking about. And I also noticed that it didn't seem like anybody else that I was talking to did, and they were getting all this idea that if there was like an issue with a particular policy or with the levels that you'd go through to make it democratic, because it was democratic, but it was also, there was a kind of a distance to it.
Diluted, isn't it? Because the bigger diluted. You get, the less democratic. When I live in a house of 5 people, sorry, I've interrupted you. If I live in a house of 5 people, we can like 5 adults, we can all have a really simple and effective democracy, right? On everything. But when you live in a block of 570 million people, then there are necessarily going to be extra convoluted layers.
So that is a reality to it, but it's also, if you looked at the system and how they decided to create the structure, it was democratic, but like you said, it was flawed, and people would just hear this message that it wasn't. They go, well, that's outrageous then, and they wouldn't think about, well, I'll look into it, how is it made? They'd just be like, no, that's outrageous. I don't want these random strangers making decisions for me, forgetting about the fact that it wasn't random strangers making decisions for you, and all that sort of stuff, but the point is, you are right that they would exaggerate a point, even though the people that were pro EU would be quite happy to say, yeah, we need some aspects of the EU need fixing, but as a body of countries working together, and what was it called, the EC, when the EC was created, it was to stop another world war, and that became the EU, and it did stop a European war for decades, and now we're screwed, where everybody seems to be, every man for himself, and it's because you've got this breaking up apart of all these different institutions that kept us working together, like an economic union is like, so much is built on an economic union,
So I don't want to relitigate the whole Brexit thing again, but I debated Brexit a couple of times formally in Bournemouth, and I felt I knew a fair amount about the EU, but I also felt that I didn't know nearly enough about the EU to make an informed decision. I was thinking, well, if I'm questioning that I don't know enough about the EU to make an informed decision, why the hell are we asking all these millions of people to make a decision based on something that they know relatively little about? And that's really dangerous. And so when I saw those education.
Yeah, when I saw the debates on TV, it was shocking how little detail it was. It was all slogans. And it's like, well,
but that's the nature of populism. So if you read up on populism,
it was such a big decision, wasn't it?
Yeah,
it was such a massive thing we were deciding on. It can't be just made from slogans.
Well, one of the characteristics of populism is simple answers to very complex problems. Like immigration is a really complex problem. It will affect your economy, or affect this, or affect that. How do you enforce it? How do you enforce it within the rules of international law? These are complex things. And just saying, right, we're going to deport 150,000 people, put them on boats, send them back to where they came from. Okay, sounds great. And people are like, yeah, that's what I want to happen. And like Kemi Badenoch from the Conservative Party, she was like, this is what we're going to do. And then she was questioned by Laura Kunsberg the other day, and she didn't have an answer of like, how are you actually going to do this? Where are you going to send them? And she's like, and then she kept like evading the answers. Like, yeah, that's populism. That is like some big idea that gets you, yeah, that sounds brilliant. And then like absolutely no practicable way of doing that. Now what's really interesting is Reform. So Reform have now, as of yesterday, I think it was, have started repealing all of their manifesto promises, because and this is like, when you're in opposition, this is quite common, which is like, you can, especially if you're a smaller party, you can promise the world because you're never going to get in, right? So you go, yeah, we're going to give tax cuts to everyone, we're going to give everyone $2 billion, 2 billion quid, and then everyone gets a holiday on the moon twice a year, and then you get every Tuesday you get a big cheesecake delivered to your house, right? And so everyone goes, that's freaking brilliant, yeah, I'm going to vote for you, but except only like 100 people vote for them, right? What's happened with Reform is their last manifesto was just like, tax cuts for everyone, we're going to find this money from behind the sofa and we're going to do this. And now the polls are suggesting that they're going to be voted in, and that Nigel Farage is going to be the next prime minister. Reform are going, oh yeah, that you know what we promised in that last manifesto. Turns out I don't think it's going to work, and so they now start repealing all of their promises, and they're saying, yeah, we can't actually do 90 billion pounds of tax cuts or whatever it is they promised, and that's reality. But anyway,
like, well, just bouncing off that, I was consistently irritated by the way the Reform are getting so much TV coverage, but also how they get interviewed, because they're quite a lot of TV presenters are quite gentle on them, and I was quite shocked free pass one day. Yeah, especially like Good Morning Britain, that stuff, the morning shows, and I was quite shocked that they had the I don't know how far he's like the second in command or third in command, the Asian guy, I'm not sure what his name is.
Zia Yusuf.
Yeah, he was on there, and they were asking him about how this deportation thing is going to work. And it was amazing watching, because I thought, actually, for once in their life, these presenters had a bit of balls. They're going, but it doesn't make sense what you're saying. And he was like, oh yeah, but blah 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 blah. And you go, so you're saying that anyone who's been here for years is going to get moved? No, because they'd be a citizen. Oh, so the citizens are right. And it was just bizarre.
Right, that's the indefinite leave to remain. That's pretty controversial, because they're literally saying that anyone that's had an indefinite leave to remain, so you've been promised you can remain here for, and they're like 20 years in, got married, got kids, and then Reform are going to get in and get rid of them. And you're like, really? Like the parents of British citizen children, and they've been given indefinite leave to remain. Like, okay, we can talk about illegal immigrants. Yeah, get rid of all illegal immigrants, because literally by definition that it's illegal that they're here. So I'm cool with that. That's fine. Get rid of the illegal immigrants in a humane, compassionate way. But those people, like, they've been here 25 years.
Wow. And maybe because it's so crazy, maybe that's why these ITV presenters are actually going for it and actually asking them, well, how's this going? This is nonsense. But it was so funny, because the guy was going, oh no, because they'll be citizens. So then they were going, so if they're citizens, what, they're not going to move? No, we won't move those. So who are you going to move? And it sounded like they weren't going to move anybody. It was really funny.
Yeah, just gets cut down. And they're like, Bob that lives on number 32.
Yeah,
like he's going, definitely going. That bastard. God.
Yeah, it's like the witch hunts in the 1600s. I don't like him, so he's going.
Yeah. So what you have is nations like Russia, and actually North Korea and Iran do this as well, and China. But I possibly less so, but Russia definitely, they will amplify these grievances, particularly over immigration, and as I say, supported by Elon Musk and even like Facebook and Meta. Mark Zuckerberg has wanted to go down that, like, oh yeah, we're going to copy the way that Twitter's doing it, and so on and so forth. And basically they tend towards the extremes. It used to be because I used to write for a blog network, and then for Only Sky Media. And when I was writing for Pathos, our income, and it's pennies, right? But our income was dictated pretty much entirely by the Facebook algorithm, right? And they changed it in like the mid 2010s, and it really started advantaging the the right. So famously, you change the algorithm. The right wing was given a great advantage, and that's when you started seeing Breitbart and Daily Caller and these websites in America that's just exploded. They exploded on the back of Facebook changing their algorithm. So the importance of algorithms is you know, you watch a Netflix documentary like the social dilemma, and it is just really interesting getting an insight into how these social media platforms operate and whatnot. That documentary was interesting because at the end of it, they asked all the people who contributed, like, what do you do with your kids? Do you let them on your social media that you've created and designed? And they're like, no, we don't let our kids on it. No, we don't let our teenagers anywhere near it. It's like, right, so you've designed this, you're telling us how horrible it is, and you're telling you wouldn't have your own kids on it, but we're all addicted, right? Okay, so yeah, but Facebook changed their algorithm to benefit the right wing, and then more recently they changed it again, and it now benefits. I think it marginally benefits the right wing, but it more tends towards extremism. So you get on there and you go through these rabbit holes, and it's a bit like Twitter that feeds that algorithm, except Twitter is very, very overtly beneficial to the right wing, and there's been loads of interesting investigations done on this, like setting up. One good way of finding out how Twitter works is set up a new account, right? And don't go and look at anything, don't feed it anything, and then see where it takes you. And like, so for example, you start getting suggested Russia Today, RT, which is a banned website, is a state propaganda website of Russia, and yet that's algorithmically suggested to you. And basically, so in the American elections, they did some research on it, and it was 2-1 Republican to Democrat. So you'd be like double the amount of Republican stuff than Democrat, and they've done it in Germany as well, and it massively tends towards AfD. And so, and I think at the moment, I've noticed in the last 2 weeks, Elon Musk said he changed the algorithm a couple of weeks ago, and pretty much since then I've just been inundated by reform, like and actual vitriol. Like, say what like about Keir Starmer, right? My opinion of Keir Starmer is like, yeah, he's pretty centrist, pretty meh, like he's trying to do a good job in a very difficult circumstance, blah 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 blah. He's not great here, he's all right over there, blah. But the hate on Twitter for him is just off the charts. It's off the charts, and I'm trying to work out, because so many are bots, so many are trolls. Elon Musk almost didn't buy Twitter because he said to Jack Dorsey, the previous guy, he said, how many people are not real profiles on Twitter? And they said 5%. He's like, that's way too high. I'm not buying this if there are 5% people who aren't actually who they say they are, i.e. trolls and bots. And then he had to buy Twitter because he is legally bound to. He wasn't able to pull out. That's why he ended up buying it for 44 billion, I think it was. But anyway, like he so now with Musk at the helm, he's doing everything he can to facilitate bots and trolls. Like the bots and trolls, he changed the verification system so the blue tick is just paid for. So Russia's like, what? It only costs us this amount per person. Like, I've long said Russia should never have invaded Ukraine, obviously for moral political reasons. But if I was Putin, I would have taken all those trillions of rubles I've spent on the war in Ukraine and spent that on bot farms and troll farms, used all of that money, and I could have influenced every single freaking election in the world. Like just the return on investment for buying people with blue ticks. So if you have a blue tick on Twitter, you can write more, but also you're amplified to the top of people's threads, and you're amplified on not just on threads, but on people's news feeds completely, right? So they've just bought up an absolute ton of blue ticks, and they're just controlling the narrative on Twitter, and it's what they're doing. So Russia is supremely good at influencing elections like Brexit, the 2016 election, and I would say the 2020 election in the US, and all elections really. And one of our biggest crises at the moment is the proliferation of bad faith actors who are manipulating social media and mainstream media. That's this whole separate discussion. That is attacking truth, attacking democracy, and is tending towards autocracy and disinformation. And we are in an epistemic crisis. In philosophy, epistemology is a study of knowledge and truth. We have an epistemic crisis going on at the moment where we don't know what is truth and what is false. And you've got Donald Trump standing up and saying just massive lies. Portland is burning down. Portland's burning down. They don't make stores anymore. The storefronts are all made out of plywood. No, they're not. It's not burning. What are you talking about? Like, so he's
Yeah,
just lying, and we know that, unfortunately, untruths travel on social media 6 times faster than truth, right? So unfortunately, just the whole network of where we get our information tends towards, it skews towards misinformation, skews to away from truth. So I find myself on my channel like trying to champion truth. I have my political biases. You already know what they are from just listening to me for the last however long, but I am really trying to champion truth because the algorithms are against us. And then you've got mainstream media outlets being bought up by the right. You've got, you know, these lawsuits in the US that have meant that CBS and ABC and Disney and Paramount and these companies have bent the knee to Trump. And then you've got Fox and OAN, and now you've got the voting machine manufacturer Dominion that had taken Fox to court over the falsehoods about them rigging the election, blah, 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 in 2020. They settled out of court for $788 million, Fox News. So Dominion are like, yeah. So we aren't these people you think that we are. They've just been taken over by a Republican former election official. So now that they're now settling out of court all these lawsuits they were having. And so you got so you got the control of the media, you got the control of the voting like systems. Like, I'm wondering what the midterms are going to look like. I'm wondering what the next election in the US is going to look like. And we can speak for an awful long time on these mainstream media outlets in the US and how they are being bent towards, through frivolous lawsuits, towards, you know, bending the knee to Trump. And then he has his own White House situation where he has Caroline Leavitt, who's a White House press secretary, who's changed the press corps. You've got more right-wing influencers. The Pentagon, I can bore you with stuff going on there well, let me very quickly, sorry, this is a big rant. The Pentagon used to have like 4 permanent desks of some of these mainstream media outlets. Pete Hegseth, the Defense Secretary, now Secretary of War, actually, came in and said, right, we're going to get rid of those 4 permanent desks and we're going to get these right-wing media outlets in there. And now he's just said, you cannot, although the media outlets have refused to sign this, but he's just said about a week ago that you cannot release any reports on the Pentagon without our say so. So like complete dictatorial stipulation that the Pentagon has to sign off any news report written concerning the Pentagon. It's like, and therefore, and war and stuff. So what? That's like what you would see in Russia, like complete state control. What about the First Amendment? You know, freedom of press, freedom of speech. And you've got this control going on, which is really, really scary. And I was going to talk about Caroline Leavitt as well. That was it. So she's got a press corps where she's now moving more people that she's selected into the press corps, so that Trump or her, they never get, or they get asked fewer and fewer difficult questions, right?
Yeah.
Which
right
inoculates.
at the beginning, she was just refusing to answer some questions and just saying that's a nasty question.
Yeah, well, Trump's now doing this all the time. So he was asked in a presser the other day by CNN, and he's done this like umpteen times now. But it was even more explicit the other day, where he was like, she started asking the question. He's like, "You're from CNN, aren't you? Oh, you're fake news. I'm not." And he said, "No, actually, I'm not going to take the question from you. No, I'm not going to take the question from you. Take it." So he's now very often just refusing to take questions from news outlets that are even remotely critical, or asking somewhat difficult questions that should hold the leaders to account. So you're just tending towards a dictatorship and autocracy in so many different levels. And
you've got footage that you see of some of the people in a meeting with him, like saying, "We are very honoured and pleased to be on this table, sitting next to you."
Cabinet meetings, yeah,
and it just looks bizarre because it looks like that. You know, it literally looks like a dictatorship, and I'm sure Americans wouldn't want to say they're in a dictatorship, but that just sounds like a script from a dictatorship. You know, when you've got all these people just literally saying, "We are so proud to be here. Thank you for letting us sit on the table." It's shocking.
Well, yeah. So in a
it's
3-hour, 20-minute cabinet meeting where they just went round and obsequiously fawned over him, and it was absolutely disgusting. The worst one was Steve Witkoff sitting at the end, who just said just the most. He's just I was it is you might as well be in North Korea. It is but it's loads of subtle things that happen, like and sorry, my audience will be bored of me talking about this, but Paramount owns so you got Disney owns ABC. So what you had happen was ABC, George Stephanopoulos, who's a reporter on ABC, was reporting on the court case of Donald Trump against E. Jean Carroll. And it was a New York court case where he was done for sexual assault. He was found liable for sexual assault. But George Stephanopoulos used the term rape. Now, technically, it was sexual assault and not rape. Because in New York, if you assault someone digitally with your fingers, with your hands, then it's not seen as rape. That has to be done with like the manhood, if you like. But the judge in the judgment for the court case, for the decision, explained that it was functionally rape. He literally says it's functionally rape. I forget the terminology, but he basically explained it and says, yeah, it is rape, even though it's technically not in New York, blah, blah, blah. So George Stephanopoulos said it was, reading from his notes, because Trump has been found liable for rape. And then Trump took him to court, right? And Trump would have lost that court case absolutely easily, right? Given what the judge had said. But ABC are owned by Disney, and Disney have this choice. Like, do we go, like, he is now taking us to court for $16 million for George Stephanopoulos saying this. Do we challenge him and win the court case, but then he will have a campaign against Disney and against ABC? Or do we just go, here's $16 million and then we're in his good books? So they paid him out of court $16 million. And then he goes, I won this court. He didn't win. I'm in the right. I've been paid $16 million. And then you had ABC, who CBS, during the election campaign, Kamala Harris was running against Trump. And CBS had a 60 Minutes interview. It's called 60 Minutes. And I think the actual interview is probably only half an hour long. I think they have 2 segments on there, whatever. But let's say it's half an hour segment of her being interviewed. And whenever you do an interview, a pre-record interview, you record much more footage than you need, right? And then you whittle it down to half an hour. And then that's what you show. This went out, but on the she was asked a question on Gaza, and in the advert for the show, she said one thing about Gaza, but when the show came up, they played the actual interview, she didn't say that as an answer. She said something else, and it's because they split her answer half between the trailer and half between the actual show. Right? He took CBS to court, right, and for unfairly editing, and this is an absolute shock. It's the worst thing CBS, and it's like, every show does this. Fox News do this, and we can prove Fox News do this all the time. And here's them doing it. And there's footage of him being asked about the Epstein files, and they edited it down to him and say, "Yeah, I would publish the Epstein files." But actually, what he went on to say is, "Well, actually, no, I'm not sure I would." Blah blah blah. So his answer was not that, and that you could actually genuinely probably sue them for that, right? If you really could be bothered. But what CBS did was nothing. But anyway, CBS are owned by Paramount. Paramount were at the time wanting to merge with a company called Skydance, and this was going to be a multi-billion-dollar merge. And in order to merge as 2 companies, they have to get the approval of the government and a department called the FCC. And the FCC was being run by a chap called Brendan Carr. Brendan Carr is a Trump acolyte, right? He's an absolute Trump wannabe.
Yeah.
So in order to merge, they needed permission from effectively from Trump world, right? And so he's taken CBS to court, which is owned by Paramount, and Paramount could either go to court and win that. They would absolutely trounce Trump in court. They'd win that, but then Trump would hate them, and they would never get to merge with Skydance and make their owners billions of spondoolies, right? So they settle out of court with Trump, give him $15 million. So he's now earned $16 million personally, $16 million from taking ABC to court, $15 million from taking CBS to court, and CBS agreed to pay him apparently $35 million worth of public service announcements. In other words, like announce nice things about him, adverts that have fawned over him to the tune of 35 million. So they sorted that out so that they can merge. And now they're run by Skydance, who is Ellison, the guy that runs Oracle. He's a super Trump supporter, is now put in charge of CBS News, Barry Weiss, who is an anti-woke campaigner, blah, blah, blah. So CBS has now got an editor-in-chief who's super right-wing, and they've just paid out Trump a bunch of money. So he's like absolutely laughing, but he now has CBS under his control. Disney have bent their knee, and they both paid out loads of money personally to Trump. He's already got Fox News. He's taken the New York Times to court, and he's taken Wall Street Journal to court over the Epstein story that they broke on him. And he's basically taking these big media entities to court in frivolous lawsuits that he would lose. But they have the choice. Like, if we go to court against him, then we won't get access to the White House. We won't get permission to do this from the government. So the government, like, he is using his power to quash the freedom of the press in ways that are really freaking serious. But when you join all of these things together, this is a problem. And then you have Jimmy Kimmel being cancelled because Brendan Carr, the same guy that would give permission for Skydance and Paramount to do that, he was the guy that essentially got them cancelled.
Yeah. Well, no, and that followed what's his face, Stephen Colbert as well, didn't it? And the whole thing about that they clearly have their eye on the commentators and any kind of opposition in the media, satire, anything like that as well. So they don't feel like their position is that safe, even though, like you said, they've been very, very successful at pushing people into their corner through the money that they can threaten with.
Well, Trump has just been threatening those same companies like NBC and ABC, threatening them with revoking their licenses because these late night chat show hosts are 95% anti-Trump. It's like, so you are, I thought you said freedom of speech. Like, we've got loads of excerpts of you saying that now you're in government, freedom of speech, blah, blah, blah. And Elon Musk was a freedom of speech, like, a free speech absolutist, and you were kind of going along with all this, and you were all about free speech. And now, what, you're going to revoke licenses because people have been horrible to me. They're making nasty jokes of me. So well, he's such a whiny little shit.
Yeah, he is. But you've had years of those people, those right-wing working class people saying you can't say anything nowadays, in an American accent. But that thing about there's certain things you can't say, and it's because they wanted to be racist or they wanted to be, whatever it was that is now being allowed. Now we've got this new trend that the things that were like
they're so cancel culture
outdated. Yeah.
So it's funny enough, I debated a former candidate or nominee candidate, former candidate for president of the United States. So I debated a guy called David French. He now writes for Dispatches. He's an evangelical Christian, but actually he's a really nice guy, really nice evangelical Christian, as in he's not like the sort of firebrand sort that you might have in your head. But we debated cancel culture about 4 years ago on Premier Christian Radio or something like that. And he was suggesting that it's all about the left. Cancelling and look at all of this kind of stuff to do with J.K. Rowling and blah blah blah. And I was like, actually, if you look at the data, it's all about the right, really. And like, blasphemy, for a start, is a right-wing religious thing where you can't say anything against my God, otherwise, so we're going to behead. If we want to talk about cancel culture through time, then actually, and by the way, I've lost 2 jobs from being cancelled, literally, by the religious right. So don't get me started. Anyway, we had this debate, and I think I did a pretty good job of standing up for my position there. Turns out he ended up being cancelled by his own church because he's actually an anti-Trump evangelical Christian. It's quite a rare thing, and he is a genuinely nice guy. And and he ended up being cancelled by his church. And I'd love to debate him now to say, should we revisit this cancel culture debate? Because you've been
What's your
cancelled
position
by
now?
yeah. But what you're seeing, like what is, and it's happening in the UK. So Gary Neville, for the audience who might be not from the UK, Gary Neville is an former England footballer, and he came out the other day and said, and he was walking down the street doing this selfie, and he said, look, people are putting up all these flags around. I think it's divisive, and I took one down near my hotel or whatever. He owns a hotel, and these kind of middle-aged angry white men or something, and essentially going against this whole movement of the United Kingdom March and these people with the flags and this kind of, he's saying that I want unity and love, and it's actually a really positive thing. I thought as a message, it really jived with me. Anyway, people are going mental at him. And so the people that 6 months ago were arguing, or a year ago, whatever, were arguing that, oh man, the left always cancelling, and but freedom of speech is really important. We should be free to say what we want. The same people that have petitioned for him to be sacked from Sky News, from Sky Sports, if you go onto Twitter and see Gary Neville, he's being eviscerated by all the people that just months ago were talking about how freedom of speech, we don't have freedom of speech anymore. And it's the rank hypocrisy to turn on a dime like that and go from, I'm a free speech absolutist to oh my God, do you hear what Gary Neville said about angry white men? Let's cancel him. Let's lynch him. And you're like, oh man, the hypocrisy is just too much for me.
Yeah.
Anyway,
no,
rant over.
No, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. It's insane. But this is a really a first for me, that we've got a lot of people in the chat, and we've got an enormous chat. And I normally, when I do my normal live streams, I acknowledge the chat and talk to the people. But it's long.
They're happy. They'll just get on. You got some of my peeps in there, and they're used to it.
Yeah. So when you do yours, do you just crack on? You don't really.
Yeah, if I have super chats, I'll always, because they're contributing to the upkeep of my channel and whatnot, so I'll always try and recognize them. But yeah, if I can, I do. But sometimes, I'll have somewhere between usually 400 and 2,000 people. Sometimes I can have watching, and it's you can't manage that.
No. So I mean, I am reading them, and they are talking to each other a lot, which is great. Yeah. But they often commenting on what we're saying, which is great. So yeah, it's good. If anyone wants me to read what they've said on the screen, I don't put
question. If you put something like Capital's question, and then if you want to ask a question, then that rant over. Yeah, right. Greg Skerritt knows that I rant. I'm famous for my rants on my channel.
That's why you're here, man. And we would have done the same thing, because we almost met up on the weekend, wasn't it? On Saturday, we were almost in the same place, and we would have done the same thing. I nearly went round. So yeah. I
have my games night that I did mention out on my channel. I was having a games night, but yeah, you didn't come, so screw you. But yeah. So for me, the biggest single threat, but it's connected to all these other things. So it is connected to immigration, it's connected to authoritarianism, it's connected to all of these ideas, but it is disinformation, and it is the control of the media spaces. So people generally, you've got to remember, you've got to recognize that people don't wake up in the morning with new knowledge in their heads. We don't get knowledge from the ether, right? It doesn't just enter our heads by osmosis from the universe. We get all of our knowledge from speaking to people, but generally from hanging around online and mainstream media. But as we move more and more away from mainstream media, social media becomes more prevalent in how we get our information, and then that is determined by algorithms. So our brains our knowledge is being determined by algorithms that are written by coders, it's on the AI front, like what you're starting to see now, to go back to disinformation from. So just to remind people, misinformation is information that's wrong, but it's not done on purpose, but it There's actually malinformation as well, and disinformation is purposefully done. So disinformation from Russia is bots and trolls. So bots are automated. So you might see these bot farms full of like 1,000 phones or tablets, and they each have a profile on, and they're all linked into a single computer. And then you're kind of telling them, what to say or what to like. So 1,000 of these profiles will just suddenly like a post that Elon Musk has just written, or that one of their own has just written. Like maybe you typed it, and that's then amplified by 1,000 bots liking it, and then that pushes it up the.
And that does its own work.
Yeah, so those are bots where they're all kind of automated. And then you have trolls who are actual people, like these troll farms, like the Internet Research Agency that was run by Prigozhin when he was alive, who was known as the chef. He was in charge of the Wagner private military company, this kind of mercenary unit, but he was involved in loads of things, and he ran the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg that was just basically a big troll farm where you turn up for work, and your key performance indicators would be, you need to convince this many people, or write this many tweets, or like this many things, or get this many people to argue back with you, or whatever. Like, people go in, you clock out, and it's interesting with trolls, you can tell when they're most active. It's like, so they have these bios like, I'm a conservative mom from Wisconsin, and like, I'm a Christian, I love my family, and I got my dog. It's like, yeah, why do you only comment at like 3 a.m? Oh, it's because actually you're sitting in a freaking building in St. Petersburg, mate, and you're clocking in, and you're normal. So it's anyway. So those are trolls who are real people pretending to be other people. So trolls and bots. But then you're starting to get AI. So you are starting to get people writing, or not people. You're starting to get these bots writing original content tweets. So rather than with bots, you can often tell that they've got the same content, exactly the same, like statement or paragraph or whatever, that's like, oh look, if I take a screen grab of all of these and put them together, I've got 100 people that said the identical thing. So those are bots. But now you got AI, so they can all say different things that makes them look more organic and more human, but actually they're AI, and they can then just sit there. You don't have to clock in and out. You don't have to pay people to turn up to the Internet Research Agency. You can have all these bots, automated accounts that are creating original content by AI, and you just set the parameters, and then they go and argue with people online, and that is completely distorting the narrative. And so, when I go online and see how terrible Twitter is at the moment, and how like pro this or anti that, it's like, I'm wondering what percentage of these people are actually real human beings.
Okay, so we know that that's a thing with Twitter, right? And that became a big part of the conversation for a while, and then Blue Sky was created. Is there? Do you think there's some traction, some future in alternative social media sites like Blue Sky? Or do you think it's just the same sort of thing but in a different?
No, they're very different. I'm a big fan of Blue Sky, but it is very much a liberal echo chamber. So some of my sources moved to Blue Sky, and I will use those sources where I can, but otherwise I begrudgingly have to use Twitter because I aggregate loads of information. And Twitter, like it or hate it, Twitter is amazing for having everyone on there. You got politicians, journalists, freaking soldiers on the front line for Ukraine. Adversary politicians and journalists. You get every side. You've got all aspects of of everyone in the world is on Twitter who I need to be on Twitter. And that makes it really, really valuable. So I don't have to go to the New York Times. I don't have to go to this. Like, actually, they will post their main headlines that I need in one place. And so just for someone that's a single human being trying to run a channel that is reporting on freaking everything in the world, I need efficiency. And Twitter gives me efficiency. And I really need that. Now, Blue Sky is great, but because it has quite more stringent moderation, which is really good, it makes it much more pleasant, but you don't have people from the other side of the coin, and you don't have that much of that vociferous argument, which I think is good and healthy when they are good faith actors. So Twitter's all right. Twitter was a hellhole, but it's now like a total hellhole. But the hellhole it was like more manageable, because most of the people still weren't bots and trolls. But if you're allowing bots and trolls on there, then the proportion, it just skews the narrative and it skews your perception of reality. So I'm thinking the world is a fucking terrible place at the moment. And it's probably not as bad as I think, but then people are persuaded. So my part.
Well, yeah, and if you feel like you're being kind of influenced by all this stuff from Twitter, and that's just like a microcosm of all the other media outlets. Yeah. And there'll be loads of people that are going to get all this information and go, oh my God, I'm threatened by all these different things. And they will be leaning into the direction of where these media outlets want them to go because they feel threatened.
100%.
And when you've got people that know it's bullshit, that don't want to be a part of that, then they end up like gravitating or congregating around an echo chamber. Then it's like there's no opposition to it. So it's really difficult, isn't it? Because is this a new problem that people will go, well, I need to go somewhere where the news is real or where the opinions are the same as mine, or I'm not going to be in a sea of nonsense. And then you end up in your own little world and you're not actually giving an opposing view or an opposing set of facts to people that need to hear an opposing set of facts.
I have mods on my YouTube channel because I need people to cut out all the trolls and bots who are there. But I do try and say to my mods, don't be too officious, because I've always been a free speech advocate, actually.
Yeah. You say that at the beginning, don't you?
Yeah, and so but it's all about good faith dialogue. If you're someone who's genuinely has the opposing view to me, then let's have a conversation and debate these things. But if you're a troll or a bot, so here's the analogy: we would not accept a tank rolling into our nation, right? A Russian tank. I'm French. A Russian tank rolls across the border and then starts, shooting a building in France. You'd be like, that is an act of war. We are going to war with you now. You have rolled a tank in here. But we are having these information wars where we allow bots and trolls who are employed and developed by the Russian state, for example, but North Korea, China, blah, blah, blah. And we allow them not just into our country, like into our information spaces here, but into our heads. We are literally allowing our heads to be invaded by a nefarious nation state.
Yeah.
And when that's the case, you are not a good faith interlocutor. I am not going to convince you out of your position because you are paid or you are programmed literally to never be convinced away from your position. And so your entire job is to try and disrupt everything, to upset the apple cart and to convince people away from a given position towards thinking in line with what the Russian state wants. And if that's the case, you are invading my space and you can feck off. So, I have no trouble cutting out bots and trolls, but it's quite difficult trying to work out sometimes who are good faith interlocutors and who aren't. And sometimes you can accidentally, get rid of someone who is a good faith interlocutor, right? And it's just the nature of the beast. And yeah.
I mean, I'd say another thing with the echo chamber thing, there is I don't know whether I need to say this before we look at this question that's come up. But another problem we've got with the echo chamber thing is that you will have people who are very dismissive of the other side that are on the left. So I've got lots of anarchist friends which will delete people on Facebook or whatever if they piss them off. Whereas if they didn't delete them, then or unfriend them or whatever, then the things they're trying to educate them about will get to those people rather than the echo chamber thing where it's just people who agree with them in the first place anyway. So, for example, the immigration thing, there's a lot of information that gets sent out that's just bollocks. And if you've got, these are facts about immigration, you send in those things out. If you've already deleted or unfriended a bunch of people that need to see that because, I can't be asked for that, I don't want to speak to those people, I'm getting them off my social media, then you're just talking to yourself or people like you, and that's the real
it depends
problem
what
as well.
it depends what you're in, what you want out of life. I mean, if you just want to just swim on by thinking what you want to think, then
but
you know,
if
if you
are
don't,
someone who's
no one's
influencer,
obliged to convince other people away
no.
from a position.
But
So it depends what you want.
if you are putting those things on social media, it's presumably because you want people to know it. So you know, so
I used to, when I ran my Tippling Philosopher blog at Pathos, I was criticized by many of my a bit like now with YouTube. I have all these people that you can see in the live thread at the moment. They are they follow my channel and they're great supporters and etc. etc. When I was writing at Pathos, I would have that in the comments thread below. And when you write philosophical or political pieces or articles, general articles, my raison d'etre was to like, this is what I think, and I'm putting this out there so that you criticize it, because I need to make sure that I believe what I believe and I'm justified in believing it. So I need this to go through a process of being vetted by you, by the outside world. And I'm not going to shut down anyone that's criticizing this, because I need to read that to make sure that I am believing the correct things. Do you know what I mean? Like, this
and that comes from your philosopher background, isn't it?
Yeah. So you know, it's really important to me that I don't just believe what I want to believe, but I believe what I'm justified in believing, right? And so this is process of you know, putting it out there and testing my inner thinking, and then hopefully adapting when they are challenged adequately. But what would happen is I wouldn't ban anyone from like commenting, and that used to annoy some of my like really strong followers on the blog. It's like, please, can you delete some of these people? They're just like some of these racist comments and whatever. And I'll be like, no, you know, if this is good faith dialogue, then what I want these people to do is be hoist by their own petard. So like they are. So I used to make some articles. I had a contributor as well that we used to co-write these articles on like race and IQ, and the idea that, you know, if you're black, you've got a low IQ, and if you're white, you generally high IQ or tendency to violence or whatever. We'll look at these very divisive topics, and then, you know, make sure that we're justified in believing what we're believing. And then I'd be just interacting with these race realists. So race realist is a polite word for racist. And but I'd let them comment, because like, I don't want to shut that down, because actually what I want to do is have an argument with you and show you where you're wrong, or you show me where I'm wrong, in which case I do have to look at some of these uncomfortable
but also
positions.
it's a communal thing as well, isn't it? Because I have some great
that's
memories.
What's coming on to say.
Because I remember when I'd put something on Facebook, for example, because I don't really use Twitter. So if I put something on Facebook and then someone would make a really bad, stupid comment underneath, and I'd want to reply, and if I didn't have time to reply because I was at work or I just couldn't get to it quickly, and then I look back later and there's a massive stream of people like really going at it, you know, like, and some of my, you know, socialist anarchist friends or whatever, really like putting some great arguments on. I'm just thinking, cool, go for it, you know. And
so that's the other thing is
well.
it acts as ammunition for other people to use or to learn from. And so shutting down these conversations just because you don't like them or because they're divisive and difficult, I think it is a bit of a problem. But again, it goes back to, well, what are your intentions? Is this a good faith dialogue, or are you just giving these opinions because actually you're not interested in the truth, but actually you're just interested in being racist, for example? So it's trying to work out what the intentions of these people are and what we can get out of this. But generally, I would not shut people down. I've changed my position somewhat in my YouTube channel, because actually, rather than people commenting on like philosophical blogs and political blogs, this is like, YouTube is just rife with bots and trolls, and so you end up being much more officious with people, because like, especially when you're creating content on the war in Ukraine, you know that you're going to get a load of Russian trolls just trying
to you'll be on their radar, wouldn't you? Definitely.
As soon as
doing 4 a day.
As soon as someone says Zelensky is a Nazi or Ukro Nazis, I'm like, right, sod off.
Yeah.
You're not serious.
Yeah. John, can I just say that we're an hour and 23 minutes in, and I noticed that Margaret, who's a friend of mine, said that she doesn't know what your channel's called.
So I've got
Atypical
Philosopher.
Yeah,
Atypical Philosopher is my philosophical channel, and ATP Geopolitics, which stands for Atypical Philosopher. ATP Geopolitics is my geopolitical channel. Yeah, so
and I will put a link in the description once this is done. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah, no worries.
It's funny that she said that, and I thought, you talked about your channel, we didn't say what it was called, which is quite funny. People were asking, Margaret said, "Who's Doris?"
Yeah, I was going to explain this. So, I something I love to do, and my peeps will know this big time, is analogize, because logical analogies are the best way to see if things work, and also to express things in ways that people understand better. I find analogies really, really useful. And one of my favorite analogies for the invasion of Ukraine is my next door neighbor Doris, right?
Right.
Fictional next door neighbor,
right?
Where, but she, as this poor old lady, just keeps having her house invaded or gets beaten up on the other side of the street. So, for example, if you see Doris walking down the street, and then like this guy Ivan just walks up to her and starts beating her up and punching her around the face, trying to nick her handbag, like, do you stand there and say, well, that's not my problem, or do you help Doris? Are you morally obliged to go and help, to provide her with some weapons to defend herself, for example? Or the example of Doris has her house next door, and Ivan like breaks in the house and starts like smashing up the house, and then says, right, I'm taking over the bottom floor of this house. And then what happens when the police come around? Do the police say, okay, I know that Ivan has broken in here and it's illegal, but I think just because you guys are making too much noise, it's a bit noisy in here, I think, Doris, you're going to have to go and live upstairs now. And Ivan, just because we want peace here, like, just want a quick peace, want you just shut up, everyone. And Ivan's just going to live downstairs. So that's how and it's using analogies like that to say, well, do you find that, is that fair? And you go, of course, that's not freaking fair. Like, she's had her house invaded by Ivan. You can't give Ivan, like, legally give, like, the police can't come around and give the bottom floor of the house to Ivan. Well, okay, well, that's what's happened with Ukraine. So Russia's invaded Ukraine, and we can't just go, well, actually, you can have this part of Ukraine, and as long as you guys shut up, that's fine. So it should be morally obligatory of the rest of global society to go, you can't go around invading people's houses. You can't go around invading people's sovereign countries. And we can't legally, we can't de jure give you this territory.
I love the analogy. It's fantastic. And I can see why people love it in the chat.
But the point is, Doris gets a crap kicked out of her on like a regular basis, and gets her house stolen, and the back garden's on fire and all sorts. Yeah.
And we'd all have sympathy for a little old lady. I'm not sure the Ukrainians would like to be seen as a little old lady.
Yeah.
But you're kind of like making me remember about how ridiculous it is in a way that I was so relieved that Keir Starmer supported Zelensky, and it's like, surely it's obvious that you would anyway. But it was like, well, it could have gone either way. So when he announced, that he was supporting, and they had the like arm in arm photos and stuff like that, it was like, thank God for that, because.
Well, actually, I would say it was more worrying at the beginning of the war, because there are more connections in recent history of the Conservative Party to the Russians. So you've got what's the oligarch who's in charge of the independent newspaper who runs that? Anyway, he was given Oleg anyway,
Maxwell.
No, Oleg, no, Russian guy. So he's a Russian oligarch that was given a peerage by the Conservative Party.
Okay.
And then, you've got Londongrad. You got the idea that London is one of the biggest, or was one of the biggest cities to launder Russian money. And there was, funding into the Conservative Party from Russians, blah, blah, blah. So actually at the beginning of the war, and Boris Johnson as well has some, connections to these people. The beginning of the war, people were genuinely thinking the Conservative Party could go either way on this. But Boris Johnson is well recognized now as making the right decision on Ukraine, and they love him because he really was a massive defender of Ukraine.
No, he was.
Now,
He was.
some people do say that part of that might well have been because domestically he was tanking. This was at the time of Partygate, where he was getting absolutely ripped apart in domestic politics, and this was something that he could be a winner at and get loads of plaudits from, even if it wasn't at home. Although he did get out at home to some degree, it was abroad. So you can so there are some people that are more cynical to say actually the part of the reason why he was so supportive of Ukraine is because it was his political way out of the disaster at home. But he was. Yeah, he was, and the UK was really supportive. And actually, we should always have expected Labour to be, and Lib Dems are really supportive of, as well. And part of the reason is because we don't have a history like Eastern Europe does in terms of Russia having invaded us, right? And we've always been the nemesis of Russia. We've got James Bond films. We've got the Cold War history, where the US and the UK have been the big enemies of Russia. And I think it's universally accepted that the Soviet Union kind of sucked as an entity. And because we didn't have that Eastern European relationship with Russia, I think that if you look at the surveys done of nations around Europe or nations around the world that don't appreciate Russia and Putin, we're at the top, right? And that's really good. I do like that, and it's really interesting because Russia still exists in the Kremlin is still existing in its Cold War mode. I swear it still thinks we're in like 1970. So you'll find that the Kremlin often blames the UK for loads of shit that really we're not like powerful enough to be able to do. But it's like, this has happened. Those Anglo-Saxons, they often use the term Anglo-Saxons, those Anglo-Saxons and the British are this and the UK are behind these bombs. And you're like, no, honestly, dude, we're not. But it's fine. And I quite like it because they think we're bigger and stronger and more powerful than we really are. Although I have to say our intelligence services are actually, they punch beyond their weight. We are very powerful and we do hold a lot more weight considering the size of our country and where we are internationally these days. But that said, Russia think that they think we're up here. So they hate us. And I get some kind of joy out of that because, I would like to be hated by people who are basically complete bastards, at least in a political class.
Go on.
Well, yeah, and I was just going to say, so we have a very multipolar dislike for the Soviet Union, or for Russia, and the support for Ukraine. Where it starts getting interesting, although it's not huge, when you look at all the parties, so there's some really interesting polls that have been done of like, do you approve of Vladimir Putin? Whose fault was the war type thing? But what are your thoughts on Russia? And all of our parties generally hate Russia and hate Putin. And Reform are many times above where the other parties are at. Although it's not huge, it's still significant. So I think the last survey done was like 9% of Reform voters approve of Putin, which is like 1 in 10 of their voters think Putin's an all right guy. So although that's like, it's not huge, it's still 3 times bigger than the next party that has like 3%. And that's a warning signal for me that for Reform UK, that they are the party in the UK. But it's not unusual because it's the same in Germany with AfD. It's the same in Poland with Confederation, who is the far right party there, and Fidesz in Hungary, and so on and so forth. These far right populist parties around Europe are much more likely to support Putin, probably because of ultra nationalism and traditional values that Putin espouses as well.
Yeah, you're talking about the effects of Reform and this 1 in 10 thing, and it might be an interesting moment to talk about in Portsmouth, where you're in Fareham, aren't you? But you're close to Portsmouth. It's the biggest city near you, I guess. I'm in Portsmouth.
Yeah,
and then we have these protests where people are shouting at hotels, and the counter protests which I go to where we're chanting and singing at the people shouting at hotels. It's kind of surreal. But we recently had the Nazi salute.
Yeah, I saw that. I almost reported that on my channel, but I thought it's too local Portsmouth type thing.
Local.
But yeah, it was Southsea Beach, wasn't it? Or I think it was along. Was it along there, along one of the roads there?
Just next to the South Parade Pier is where that hotel is that they keep attacking. And it was a guy that I wasn't there that night, but I was there. It was the same guy that I'd seen what he was doing like 2 weeks before that. And he was like kept shouting about Keir Starmer and kept shouting the most random chants, and it was quite an interesting experience anyway, like seeing the two sides and what we were singing and like playing drums and stuff, and they were just shouting not absolute obscenities. Nonsense. Yeah. And he had a megaphone, and it was just like he was like an absolute idiot. And it was like, and also they you could have profiled them. Like it was just a bizarre. You've probably seen the photos, and you're just thinking, oh my god, this is not a great representation of British intelligence. And so there was that going on. But what was really cool was the local newspaper doing a massive thing on their front page, I think it was, or certainly on like a huge part of their page, whether it was inside or on the front page. I think it was the front page saying this is not on. You know, to have someone at a protest doing a Nazi salute is not what we're about.
I'm glad they did that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really cool. Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. It was Chris Broom who.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And he's a good guy, and I thought it was really good he did that. And I messaged him and said, "Is there any copies of that lying around now? Because I'd love to talk about it on my channel and you know, like show it and say how cool it was that the paper ran that story and said, you know, that this is not on." And he said, "No, it's all digital, and he hasn't got a you know, there's not a lot of physical copies anymore." So he said, "I can send you a digital file." I thought, well, I could easily do, you know,
but what's interesting about these people who they live in these information spaces. So this is going back to the idea that you don't wake up and have new knowledge. So the knowledge comes from somewhere, and it's invariably information spaces online. And I was going to give the anecdote of and I've told my peeps this before, but my partner's daughter lives with us. She's had a baby recently, and she lives in our spare room. And she went on holiday with her dad a couple of weeks ago, and it was interesting speaking to her afterwards. She's like, "My dad's got really extreme views now on a bunch of things," and I'm like, "Where are you getting this from, Dad? Like, this is..." And he, because he lives on his own, just lives in these. The way I interpret this is he lives in these information spaces where he's just spiraling into like the extremes. Is what these algorithms do, is they take you from a fairly sensible position, but if you're like, "Oh, I'm a bit concerned about this, a bit concerned about that," and I wrote an article once on do we drive what we read, or do our beliefs drive what we read, or does what we read drive our beliefs? Right. And so in other words, like, do I believe something and so I read the Daily Express, right? Or do I get sent down there? And it's basically, I think the most justifiable position is that it's a coextensive, so it's both, right? So yeah, it's a spiral. There's a spiral theory to this, and I've seen this with my dad, where my dad, he's got dementia now, so I wouldn't be able to convince him out of any position particularly, but he started as a former Royal Navy sort of chap. He started the Daily Telegraph, back, you know, broadsheet, sensible newspaper when it was then. It's now gone a bit more populist, but it was a sensible broadsheet centre-right newspaper. And then when he came out of the Navy, more time on his hands, the Daily Telegraph turned into the Daily Mail, and then the Daily Mail, and then his opinions were getting more and more problematic, and then the Daily Mail turned into the Daily Express, and then he was just like sending me emails saying, "Have you..." And I'd be like, "How did you get from here to here?" And it's this spiral thing where it's like, it's partly you, but it's also partly where you're being drawn towards and pushed towards, and you kind of go from here to the next place and to the next place, and the algorithms and the newspapers, and they take you there, and then you're like, oh, I'm at this extreme position, but now, oh my god, look what the Express is saying, oh, I'm going to jump onto the Express. And then because fear is so evocative, much more than joy, much more than positivity, and it will drive you, I think, much more. It's so easy to spiral, and it's this coextensive relationship between the media you read and your own kind of beliefs that spiral you to an extreme, and that can work on the left as well, towards anarchism, and I wouldn't say that I'm there as some of your friends are. I'd say I'm fairly comfortably center left, but I would advocate, for example, for NATO, because I report on it all day long, and I think if it wasn't for NATO, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania would be in the Russian Federation right now. Whereas I look at Zara Sultana and your party in the UK that's split from Labour and Jeremy Corbyn, and Zara Sultana came out against the Green Party, said, well, we're differentiating ourselves from the Green Party. The Green Party on their website still advocate for being part of NATO, and we think it's this warmongering, hateful, blah, blah, blah. And she has this tirade against NATO where I'm like, yeah, I can understand why you might think that if you're being really naive and simplistic. I used to think something like that, but actually now I'm deeply involved in reporting on this. The world is a really complicated place. And if you don't have a serious defense, right, we can slag off the military industrial complex, but if you don't have a decent military industrial complex that is building weapons for you, you will be attacked and taken over. And that's just the nature. Like, it's great to have all this kind of pacifistic, like, lovey-dovey interpretation of the world, but unfortunately, if not everyone else is the same, then they'll take advantage of you. So you need I believe in liberalism with teeth. Like, you need to stand up for your liberalism.
No, I get that. Yeah, I see that. My issue with another party being created is that something that really gets me, and I'm
don't get me started on this. I know what you're going to say.
I was ranting about this to Louis. Me and Louis had a fantastic conversation about all this.
So for my viewers, Louis is your son. Who's also in your band.
He's a great musician, but he's a very cool man who's very wise as well. He's 24 and he's brilliant. But we were talking about we were basically setting the world to rights one night in a hotel in Italy, and I went on a big rant about how it's so common and like just all the time the left argue with itself and like divides into all these different into all these different parts, and what stops the left from getting anywhere is the right managed to stay united because they got a couple of things they're gonna get really passionate about, and they don't split off into 5 different versions of the right.
They're not so puritanical.
Yeah.
So I thought you were going to talk about the left being split by party as well. So the problem in the UK, and this is very particular for the UK, is that up until really the last election, the right was never split. So UKIP split them a little bit, but not in any serious manner, and the Brexit Party likewise. And so the right had a consolidated vote of the entirety of the right. And the left was always been split. Centre-left, centrist, centre-left is Lib Dems. Centre-left is Labour. Then you've got Green Party sitting to the left. Then you've got Plaid Cymru in Wales, and then you've got SNP in Scotland. And now you've got your party that's come along and split Labour. That if they become an actual thing, it's just stupidity. It's like you are handing reform the election. So you've got like 5 parties. Essentially, depending on where you are in the UK, it can be as many as 5 parties splitting the left, and you've got 2 parties. And the only reason Labour won a landslide victory, it was a wide victory, but it's very shallow. Labour got in with a very small vote because we got first past the post voting system, and we need proportional representation, but we don't have it. So Labour were able to sweep in, but it's a bit of a false sense of really what's going on, and there are a lot of very tight seats around the UK. But if Reform merged with the Tories, the Conservative Party, then the left is going to get absolutely hammered in the next election.
Yeah.
And it's because they're splitting themselves. So you have to have a
in
progressive
France,
alliance at the very least.
Yeah. And in France, they did that, didn't they? They stopped the far right party from getting in by merging, didn't they?
Not quite. So France is essentially it's a third far right, Rassemblement National, Marine Le Pen's party, and they've done better and better and better, and they're now pretty much a third centre right, and then a third left, and the left is pretty left in France, and has historically been very, very sort of politically active and powerful, but because they're a third, they can't get anything agreed, right? And it's that's why they keep having dissolved governments, because the president, they have a different system there, but the president then elects selects the prime minister, and they select this cabinet. But because he's centre right, Macron, centre right, and he keeps selecting a cabinet that's trying to reflect what he wants to do and reform the welfare system and get the pension age up and do these things that actually France probably needs to do. Like, even if you're kind of left wing, there's a lot of power that left have there, and they don't want to reform their pension age and stuff like that. And actually, they really freaking need to. Because we're getting older and it's unsustainable. But the left there is like, well, we're going to vote everything that these guys do down, and then the right, like, we're going to vote, and so it's just this complete stasis because it's split. So third, and because he's not putting people from these different factions into his government, then they're all just going to jump on that government, and it's just that. Right. So that's why it's just a bit of a problem. That's how I would interpret it. I'm no expert there, but
well, yeah, I'm not an expert, but I'd heard, and to be fair, I'm not an expert, but I'd heard that they had like a victory against the far right government.
So this is a phenomenon. Sorry to interrupt, but this is a phenomenon that happens a lot across. Yeah, you are right. This happens a lot across Europe. So Rassemblement National are like, because they used to be called the National Front, the Front National, under her father, under Marine Le Pen's father, who was properly like far right,
fascist.
Yeah. And so this is, I would argue that, and people who are reform voters will not like this at all, but I would argue this is what UKIP did, which is like the BNP, British National Party, used to be the National Front, and the National Front were like, no, most like 98% of people like not going anywhere near that. That is actual fascism. So then they reinvented themselves as a British National Party, and then they were like, I'm making these numbers up, but they're like 5% of people like now, from 2% to 5%. And that's a bit more acceptable, but still, no, you had Griffin, what's his name? Richard Griffin? No, what's
Nick Griffin.
Nick Griffin, who was like, yeah, no, it's still not cool. And then essentially,
and then it was EDL, wasn't it? And the EDL.
Yeah. And then you had EDL coming along as not quite a political party, but more of a movement. And then Britain First, and then you had UKIP sort of coming along, and then Brexit Party and Reform. But I would put that in the historical evolution of the National Front to Reform. Now, I know a lot of people will not like that, but what this is the right wing is trying to, this extreme of the right wing is basically prodding and probing and testing the UK population until it comes to an acceptable level. Like, there's a tipping point where people are like, oh, now it's acceptable to.
Yeah. Well, like, Reform are literally quoting Enoch Powell, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah,
and so I think it's like I think it's a justifiable position, but people will not like to be associated with that kind of evolution. And actually, Reform has an interesting attraction to people on the left as well. So a lot of left-wing working class, and this is somewhere I think we need to talk about. It's like, how has this happened over time, and what's been going on? I think there's a lot to say about deunionization of the UK and many countries as well. But essentially, you've got this testing until you get to this acceptable position, and that's what Marine Le Pen did. So she took National Front, or Front National, turned it into Rassemblement National, National Rally, and said, that's not acceptable, but we can turn this into something that is acceptable, but we still have a core tenets of like anti-immigration and Euroscepticism and blah blah blah. And so really, Rassemblement National is the reform. Is to the Front National what Reform is to the National Front. controversial as that may sound, that there's evolution. Now, what you'll find, sorry, to go back to what your initial point was, is that in France, and you see this in Germany, you see this in Austria just now with the FPO party, which is effective. So all these parties around Europe are all pretty much the same, right? Whether it be FPO in Austria, and then you've got Vox in Spain, you've got Front in the UK, AfD in Germany, Rassemblement National in France. What you often get is everyone else going, we can't let these guys in. We can't let these guys in. So in France, what they do is like, we can't let Rassemblement National in. So the Republican and Insoumis and these left wing and the centre right get together and vote in a way that these guys don't get in. And that's happened in Austria, where they've been frustrated from making a government for ages, and then a coalition government's finally been made. It's happened in Netherlands with Geert Wilders' PVV and all sorts. So, but here's the issue: the more you frustrate the right or the far right or populist right from getting in, the more popular they will become, because everyone goes, or the people that like them or are teetering will go, I can't believe these guys are just frustrating these guys from being able to look, they've got the most votes out of everyone. You can't just form these coalitions to stop these guys getting in. And then they get, and there's this argument to say you actually need to let them get in, because you need to lance the boil. You need people to understand how shit these guys are at ruling, at governing, to then realize that they're not serious at governing. Do you know what I mean? So in Reform UK,
it depends how bad it would get, isn't it?
Yeah, but otherwise you'll be forever frustrated, though. Like, I'm not saying I definitely adhere to this, but there isn't. So, for example, Reform now run something like 8 councils in the UK, is it, or 11? I don't know. They run a whole bunch of councils, local councils, and it turns out that they're doing a really crap job, by and large, of running these. Loads of scandals. People have been either sacked, resigned, haven't turned up. Loads of people who have voted. But essentially, if you vote a non-serious, and I mean this, like non-serious political party that are only like around because of immigration, into local government. So you like imagine you're running for local government, where I've got to sort out adult and children's social care. I've got to sort out education. I've got to sort out potholes. I've got to sort out transport. I've got to sort out this. I've got to sort out that. And you're like, I'm going to vote this Reform guy. Why? Because they're anti-immigration. It's like, okay, the local council has nothing to do with that. Essentially, that's national policy. So why are you voting this Reform guy? And he's like, yeah, immigrants, blah blah blah. Then gets in and like, okay, we're going to put you in charge of children's services. They're like, I hate immigrants. You're like, okay, so the point is that these guys don't. So it was Durham, no, it was Kent County Council, where the woman came on. I was listening to a woman. It's like, we just got 54 new councillors from Reform. Only 4 of the councillors had experience of local government at all. So 50 of them didn't, and no one knows what they're doing. And the whole council was paralysed and people weren't turning up to meetings. It was an absolute shit show. So the point I'm making is that when you do eventually vote them in, then people go, oh yeah, no, actually turns out they're a bit shit.
Yeah, and you could go back to something I said about an hour ago, which was like that guy that was on TV not really being able to clarify what his idea was on deporting these hundreds of thousands of people. That in practice would be a mess. So you're right, that it could be that they get in and then the people are like, oh well, that's not what I voted for, because they don't actually know what they're doing.
Exactly.
And they're not doing what they're saying.
So like with Reform, right, they would decimate the welfare system, right? And you can bet your bottom dollar that a lot of people that are going to vote Reform are going to be dependent on the welfare system, right? So they are classic like faux libertarians. Libertarians are like small government, individual people are gods, freedom. You know, we all have our individual freedoms. We all are our own gods. Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, blah blah blah. But actually, they're not really libertarians, because they want to control where people move. They want to control, you know, usually what people say and whether you can have same-sex relationships. And it turns out that you're not really libertarian, but you say what you really want is government not to regulate the economy.
Yeah.
Right. But you're happy for them to regulate everything else in your private life.
Yeah. Yeah. And your own, and you want the regulation to be your own beliefs.
Yeah. Just a reflection of exactly. That's a freedom of speech. Like, it's freedom for me to say what I like, but if you say something I don't like, screw you. You're getting shut down. Yeah. So I think reform, if they got into national government, they would want to make huge swinging cuts to the government, to the civil service. They want to cut net zero for the climate. They'd, things that are really important. There'll be slicing and dicing, but also things that would actually not benefit their own electorate. So but
one of the issues would be that with whatever damage they cause, because this is an issue for America at the moment. Whatever damage Trump is causing, the next government has to correct it all.
Yeah.
So the more that he does, the more they've got to correct. And some things he's doing, he's like getting rid of loads of records of stuff that happened. There's some things that are going to be really difficult to correct.
Yeah.
And if, for example, the reforms start fucking up the NHS, which I'm sure every single person in the country would be outraged by, but it would be done. It's already been done under our feet anyway.
Yeah.
But because Richard Branson's buying loads of bits of the NHS, isn't he? And has been for decades. But if it was really blatant, right, we're not going to have an NHS, then they started making those moves. By the time there's another election, they might have made so much damage to the NHS that it's like, well, we need to somehow create this thing again that we all valued.
The only times you get the creation of huge things like that would be, it's no coincidence. I think the NHS was created after the war.
After the war,
where it's like you've got complete destruction of society, and you're like, right, we need to do big things now, and that's when you can do big things, and then you just gradually chip away and lose them, and you don't ever get them back. And I think genuine concern there for sure, but Reform do realise this as well, though. Nigel Farage, if you look at the manifesto for the last election, Reform did have some policies that were all over the shop, as in, like, they were picking from the left as well as the right. So they had some interesting things on the NHS that I broadly agreed with, in terms of, I can't remember what it was training and stuff, things like, that is good, sensible. There was a couple of things that clearly they understood that in Brexit, they stole a bunch of Labour left-wing voters and working class voters, particularly, up north, taken votes that have been generationally Labour and stolen them, so that they are now Reform, or UKIP, Brexit Party to Reform. And they realise that to keep that, they have to have a manifesto that is a bit kind of all over the place. So I'd expect there to be some, like, they were pro nationalizing steel, I think, when the steel industry was in trouble recently, and they supported the government sort of stepping in there, I think, if I remember correctly, which is something that otherwise they wouldn't normally do. So I think there is this realization, and this comes down to I think voters from the left, from the Labour left, it's much easier for them to leave Labour now, because there is a deunionisation that's taken place in the UK, as it has in the US and other places around the world. And I think that is a real problem, because corporations, I was watching the first episode of Alien Earth, which is a series in the Alien ecosystem.
Oh yeah. I started watching that as well.
Yeah, and the world is not split up into countries, but 5 different corporations. And I thought that was, and I think sci-fi does this quite often, but that's an interesting, and I think we're tending towards that. So I think, national boundaries, tech is going across boundaries, social media, we are living in a much more integrated world, and companies are starting to control. We can talk about Palantir, and we can talk about, the tech oligarchs that I mentioned earlier, and their ideas of techno-fascism or techno-authoritarianism that people like Peter Thiel really do advocate. They are becoming so powerful that they have greater, like, monetary value than the GDP of many countries, right? And so I do worry about that, whereby corporations will need to be held to account, but we're not going to get that. We are.
Who's going to hold them to account? Because there's so many people bowing down to them. So many people in authority bowing down to them, not just ordinary people.
Exactly. So for example, I'm really worried about digital sales tax and digital regulation. The EU and the UK really want to regulate social media, but the US is using that, because you've got these people at the center of the administration in the US. You've got your Peter Thiel, your David Sachs, your Elon Musk, and Mark Andreessen, and then Mark Zuckerberg, and then Tim Cook. They're all hanging around having meals with Trump, promising to give money and blah blah blah. Tim Cook from Apple just gave him a big gold thing with a glass thingy, like keeps him on side. Yep. Okay. So but what this means is that when the US administration then go to negotiate trade deals with the UK and the EU, these people are at the center of it, and they all say, don't do a trade deal with the EU unless they repeal the digital sales tax. So we don't want to be taxed. And if they try and regulate what we do and how we say things and the kind of activities that we have in Europe or in the UK, that needs to be stripped out as well. That's happened in Canada with their trade deal, and it's happened in, I think, the UK trade deal. I think we need to see the details of what's happened there. But I think basically the US is so powerful in terms of trade, and Trump is such a bully that he's actually being able to bully on behalf of the tech industry to screw Europe over, and they're successfully doing that. And that is deep concern I have, because you're tending towards this kind of situation where corporations have more power than countries. And
those tech companies are making the decisions as much as he is, isn't it? He's like a spokesperson for,
like Trump is vacuous. He has no ideology. So I don't think Trump is kind of evil, but he's not like so there's a guy called Stephen Miller who's this fascist who is, and the Heritage Foundation and all the authors of the Project 2025 blueprint for the Trump administration that was written by people in the Heritage Foundation, which is this religious political think tank that is now basically running the government. So Trump doesn't read. Well, if you don't read, and he doesn't take intelligence briefings, right? So if you don't read or take intelligence briefings from your own freaking government, where are you getting your information from? How are you learning? What's he learned from Trump 1.0 to Trump 2.0? Like, how's he improved his knowledge of the world? He is basically fed stuff from people around him. And he's famously got this recency bias where he just regurgitates what the last person told him, because he doesn't have any veto system, because he doesn't have a set amount of knowledge, because he doesn't read. The man apparently hasn't even read his own book that was ghostwritten for him, The Art of the Deal. Like, so like he basically means he's very easy to manipulate.
Well, when he goes off piste, it's so obvious that he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah,
and he gets really excited about things that are really like nonsense. Like he'll repeatedly go on about like the Gulf of America, like that's a thing.
But he also doesn't know what he's talking about. Like you say, there are so many things to do with Ukraine that shows he doesn't have the first clue what he's talking about. He was just in a presser the other day, or in a meeting in the White House, and Marco Rubio came in and whispered something in his ears to do with the Gaza deal. They'd sorted out the Gaza deal, and not that you would expect the president to be doing the actual negotiations here. You've got teams doing that. It's very technical, but he was handed a sheet of paper, and people could see through the sheet of paper, and we know what was written on it now. And the sheet of paper said, you need to approve the Truth Social post so that we can get this deal done, so that you can so he can get the plaudits for doing the Gaza deal. He's not writing his Truth Social posts. You need to approve the Truth Social post. That's what's written on it. You can go and find it online. You can go and look at this. It is there for you to see. So, he doesn't write these Truth Social posts, or at least at the very most, he's approving them. Some of them are written in different styles to others, like the one that he turned on a sixpence to do, or did this complete about face on Ukraine recently, where he said Ukraine can win. All of a sudden, you're like, where's that come from? You spent the last 7 months talking bollocks about Ukraine, and now you said they can win. But he never wrote that. In fact, he was in the UN giving a speech in the UN. Then he went straight from the UN speech that he gave to meet Zelensky. And then he went straight from Zelensky to meet Macron. And in that time period, he wrote a massive, would have taken you and I half an hour to write this thing and get it right. This massive post on Ukraine came out on True Social. And you're like, he never wrote that. He's literally just been 100% in meetings and speeches. So Like, he's not writing that. So who is writing that? Who is whispering? When he goes and has meetings outside of the White House, when he goes to the NATO summit, when he goes to the Basilica in the Vatican and speaks to Zelensky on a chair, when he goes to, when he has the EU leaders into the White House, he has people speaking to him who know what the fuck they're talking about. And they speak to him. And he's like, oh, wow. Oh, that's so when he came out with this True Social post about, oh, it turns out that Russia's economy is rubbish. And it turns out that Ukraine can win. And it is like, it was this, like, I finally found out the reality about what's going on in the war. What's been going on for the last 7 months? It turns out that Zelensky the other day said that the maps that Trump had in the White House were from Russia and they were just wrong. So he's getting his information from Russia about the war in Ukraine when he's supposed to be supporting Ukraine. And it's like, so he doesn't know what he's talking about. The people around him, like Stephen Miller, are evil and ideological and more aligned to Russia. And they are feeding him stuff. And whenever he's out of it, he's like, oh, that's really cool. Oh, these guys, yeah. And he changes his mind. But then he goes back to White House, and like 5 days later, he's back in this kind of environment where all these people are feeding him like Grimer Wormtongue, King Theoden, Lord of the Rings. They're just whispering sweet nothings in his ear and poisoning his brain. And he's a deeply vacuous, ignorant man. But that makes him all the more dangerous because it's the people behind him then, or international leaders.
Well, and he's led by self-interest and the idea that he can get rich and powerful, and this is his idea of the road for himself to get rich and powerful. So he can, all that stuff that he said over the however many years, going on about how he wants to make America great again. It's all been about his own life becoming better and having some great position or whatever. So all these things, all these people that are manipulating him, he's running along with that, thinking this is it. This is my chance to be, all this.
If you are a narcissist, an actual like clinical narcissist, then you are particularly easy to manipulate, and the people around him can manipulate him. They know what to say. You've got to a point where he like some months back, he had this meeting with African leaders, and like 2 African leaders literally promised him to build golf courses in their country. They're going into meetings now knowing that all we need to do is bribe the president of the United States with whatever, and then you can just get him to do what you like. It's just absolutely outrageous. But that means that's really dangerous. That's a national security threat to the United States, because if you're Vladimir Putin, you can just like butter him up and he'll do anything you want, which has happened.
Yeah. You reminded, this is a bit of a tangent, but you are reminding me of a Jackson Browne song, Lives in the Balance. The last verse being, I want to know who the men in the shadows are. I want to hear somebody asking them why. They can tell us who our enemies are, who to fight and who to die, all that. And that's the thing, isn't it? That was written in the 80s when he was talking about Reagan. And, this is a very extreme version of that, where we know there's a whole team behind him that are creating this thing. Like you said, the Project 2025, it's not Trump necessarily,
No.
It's
no, but the problem is Trump is very much like a playground bully, although he doesn't really like confrontation. But if he's in the power position, he loves it. So he's happy to bully you. If you stand up to him, maybe less so, but actually you can't stand up to him because he will just. So the problem that Keir Starmer has, and this is a real dilemma, and the EU is in the same position, is that we really want to see Keir Starmer or the EU or any nation stand up to Trump and say, no, you can't do this. You can't bully us into this position. No, you do need to stand up. No, you do need to support Ukraine like this, or you do need to do this. As soon as you stand up to him, he'll go, screw you, and then he'll whack tariffs on. Like, he's throwing tariffs around. But this is really dangerous.
So weird. He was throwing tariffs like crazy, wasn't he? In the first, a few months of the
Liberation Day. So the tariffs. So originally he said he's going to put reciprocal tariffs on, but what that means is if you've got 10% tariffs on our like wood, we're going to put 10% tariffs on your wood. Or if you're going to put or if you got just an average tariff of 20% on us, we'll put an average tariff of 20% on you. But he didn't do reciprocal tariffs. No one really knew how the percentages got worked out until about a day later, when it turns out it was representative of the trade deficit and trade surpluses. So trade surplus is that we sell more stuff to you than you buy from us. And if there's a trade surplus, then he would put a 10% tariff on you. But if there's a trade deficit, the percentage would be worked out in terms of what the trade deficit was, which is like, we are buying more stuff off you than you're buying off us. Well, if you're Vietnam, right, you're never going to be buying as much American stuff because it's more expensive as you buy off them. America went to Vietnam and said, can you, like, in the last decades, so can you build us loads of stuff? Like, can you make all our sneakers and can you make all our t-shirts? Because at the moment, China's doing that, and China are an adversary, and we don't really want them to be doing that. We don't want to be depending on China. So we want you to make our cheap stuff. So they had this trade policy and this geopolitical strategy to get Vietnam to do a load of stuff for them. And then you buy that cheaply because you're not going to get people working for tuppence halfpenny a day to make a pair of sneakers in the United States, right? Then Trump comes along and says, oh, it turns out that Vietnam's selling us way more than we're buying than they're buying off us. Well, yeah, they're all poor. You know, most of them are poor over there. Of course, they're not buying as much stuff off you. They're a smaller country, of course. Like, it's complete naivety. But then says, because there's this trade deficit of X billion dollars, we are putting a tariff on Vietnam that is representative of that. It's like, but Vietnam were like, but you've just told us to make this cheap stuff for us over the last couple of decades. Anyway, so all the tariffs were completely naively constructed. And it's this idea that if you have a trade deficit, it's inherently bad, but that's not necessarily true. Trade deficit means that you are rich. Usually means that you can afford to buy more stuff off them than they can afford to buy off you. It's a reflection of America having loads of money. Now, you might want to onshore some manufacturing. You might want to, for national security, you might want to have microchips and semiconductors made in the United States, you know, because you don't want to depend on other countries. But trade deficits aren't necessarily like prima facie a bad thing to have, but he was like, it's a bad thing to have, and we're going to tariff the shit out of everyone. And like little Marshall Islands or whatever, that like you buy all these oysters off them for like 3 million quid a year, but they don't buy anything off you because there's like 4 men and a penguin. and you put like 120% tariffs on them. What, you nut? Anyway, I'm kind of exaggerating. Yeah. You get the point.
But it was a really bizarre kind of like playground policy. Just like,
but the reality is that he's a bully, right? So going back to my original point was like, he throws tariffs around because he can, and he can get what he wants. And so the problem for people like Keir Starmer or European leaders is that if we stand up to the US, he's so retributive that he will just hold a grudge and then whack tariffs on us. So Keir Starmer's in between a rock and a hard place, because he's like, I really want to stand up for this industry and that industry. But if I do and demand this, then he will go, well, you can't have that, and you will get these big tariffs. So the UK actually did quite well. This is a one and only Brexit dividend, is that we came out with 10% tariffs, whereas the EU had 20% tariffs plus. So we actually did quite well. But the problem is, you can never negotiate. Like, it's always going to be the case that the more powerful country or the more powerful agent in a negotiation will get the better deal.
Yeah.
That's why it was always insane that we came out of the EU. You can't come out of the EU and say, right, now we need to
stake in it, didn't we?
But not just that, but the EU was the biggest trading bloc in the world. So if the EU went around and sorted out a trade deal with, I don't know, Vietnam, you know the trade deal is going to be to the benefit of the EU, right? Because Vietnam is going to not be in a... Now, you can argue that's not fair. That's like but that's just the nature of these power struggles. So the EU is going around the world doing these amazing trade deals. Then we go, do you know what? We're going to opt out of all of those trade deals, and then we're going to renegotiate them from a position of comparative weakness. So we come out of a trade block of 570 million. Now we're only 70 million people, and we're going to renegotiate every single one of those trade deals. And you're thinking, okay, they're not going to be as good as we had in the EU because they could manipulate really good trade deals. No, of course they're not. So then the Conservative government at the time, and Michael Gove just admitted this, by the way, yesterday, but we did a trade deal with Australia and New Zealand that was really shit. And it was like, well, we're more powerful than Australia and New Zealand, technically. Like, surely we should be able to negotiate ourselves at least that better trade deal. No. So, and at the time, our negotiators came away actually and said that wasn't a very good trade deal. And now Michael Gove has just said the trade deals we did were bad for our farmers. Yeah, Australia and New Zealand did us over, did our agriculture over. Then we did a trade deal with Japan. That was shite as well. And we're like, brilliant. Right. So we come out the EU And the first 2 trade deals we've done are CAC. And like, so that's a good sign for the future. And so like, why you would, so you can never win the EU debate. You can never win Brexit, like argue for Brexit on economics. You can only win the Brexit debate on immigration, in my opinion. It's the only, like, even sovereignty, like, what rules do you really want? Tell me what rules. People like James O'Brien used to do this quite a lot on LBC, where he would argue with these Brexiteers and he'd say, okay, well, what rule don't you like?
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah.
and they'd be like, yeah, you're banging on about sovereignty. What rule don't you like? Bendy bananas. That wasn't a thing, mate.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, that's what it comes back to what we said before. That it was all argued with slogans. There was no substance at all to the debate, and that would be talking to someone on the bus, talking to someone online, watching TV debates. The TV debates were ridiculous, and it was such a massive thing. It's like, because I also think that the 48%, 52% was too small. I think they should have done it, said, right, we're going to do it again in a year's time. And we're not going to change something so massive unless there's a 10% difference. Because I just think,
I think you should have a super majority for really important things like that. So it needs to be like a 60%. But yeah, like really, really frustrating, because really complex decisions like that need to, as you say, not be done on the slogans and whatnot. But so on immigration, though, you could win an argument to leave the EU on immigration. You say, look, if I don't want loads of Eastern European or European generally, European migrants in the UK, right? If that is my thing, if that's what floats my boat and really drives me, then
floats your boat.
Floats my small boat. Then actually you can win that argument. Like, if immigration really is really important to you, then you can win the Brexit argument. The problem is that we stopped like a fairly large amount of European migrants coming in. It wasn't crazy, but we thought at the time it was a large amount. We swapped that for like an absolute ton of Asian migrants. So after Brexit, the Conservative government then arranged some rules that essentially allow loads of people to come in on student visas and turn them into work visas and then family visas and blah blah blah. And so we went from loads of white-skinned European migrants, and we swapped that many white-skinned European migrants for that many brown-skinned Asian migrants. And the sorts of people who were worried about migration before are like even more angry about what's happened post-Brexit. So Brexit, if immigration was your thing and you argue Brexit on immigration, you've got a kick in the teeth, because immigration got worse and probably was the sorts of immigrants that you were even less happy with. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, even on that, Brexit didn't deliver.
Yeah.
Now, people say it's because they did a bad Brexit, right? They didn't do it properly, or didn't. But the reality is that Brexit hasn't worked. We've lost, what is it, £450 billion in lost income.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely staggering amounts. And we've got a financial black hole at the moment. The Labour Party is really struggling. They've got to put taxes up. But I was going to talk about this right at the beginning of the video, because if you look at the tax burden on European countries like France, Germany, Italy, Spain, from 1980 to like 2021, everyone's tax burdens have gone up. It goes back to society is more expensive. Just things are more expensive now, and we do much more care. And so you either strip it all away and start again. That's kind of what reform would do, or you've got to accept that we have higher tax burdens. But actually, when you look at how much money we used to spend on food back in the 1950s, it's something like 30% of our income was spent on food. We now spend, 8% of our income on food. So we do have a lot more disposable income, arguably, but although we spend it on a lot more things. Right. So in the 1950s, we had food and then, cardboard boxes and tricycles. And that's what we'd spend our money on. But I'm joking. But now we've got like mobile phones, mobile phone insurance, and we're like, there's so many things to spend money on. And all of it we think is freaking important. Anyway.
Yeah.
I've probably bored you and your audience.
No, not at all. No. This is brilliant, and it's strange for me to ignore the comments, but I'm kind of reading the comments. I'm just not reading them out loud. So you guys are having a great time, so that's lovely, and you can tell that they are listening to us because they are answering some of the things we're saying. But they're also having a chat about what previous people are saying, which is great. And somehow Margaret's brought Northampton into the conversation. Just as we've stopped for a moment, I want to say hello to, I don't know if he's still here, but my partner in crime that I do a live stream with every 2 weeks was here, and I don't know if he's still here, but Book Blather is Dave, who I do the show.
Can you talk to the audience while I go to little boy's room?
Yeah, and I might do the same thing, but yeah, you go first.
How do I take myself away from this? I should be able to.
Oh, I don't know.
Where's my remove from stage?
You got
Hang on.
Okay. Hello. Okay, so let's have a look at these comments, because this is obviously I can't go right to the beginning. I'm going to see if I can find. There's loads of stuff about penguins. There's stuff about Doris, obviously. So you guys are very passionate about Doris. I love the Doris analogy. Absolutely love it. And I had seen Doris come up sometimes in the videos, but I didn't see the original thing. Yeah. Both so Michael Gowdy says both Mussolini and Hitler believed that they represented the real people who were deceived by the lies of the elite, and they were both anti-capitalist and anti-communist. Again, very easy to manipulate the population. Yeah. Lucky Strike says I can confirm there's a lot more open racism in my city than there used to be the last couple of years. No, absolutely. That's one of the things that's quite shocking that's happening kind of post-Brexit, thanks to all this stuff that's happening. Definitely. I've seen it as well. I haven't seen it as much as I feared I would, to be fair, but I am seeing it, and it's become okay to. And there's people saying I'm proud to be a Nazi, which is just absolutely phenomenal. Michael Gowdy says reform are smart enough to steal what they see as popular policies, though as they all hate each other, nothing will work if they win the election. Well, yeah, I mean, there's definitely an argument for seeing them crash and burn. I do see that, but again, like with America with Trump, you got to correct the damage. That's the thing, isn't it? I'm gonna go right back to because that was quick, Johno. He's trying to get back. Look, he's should we talk about him? You're back.
Waving frantically. Yeah, I suppose I better get my beauty sleep in a second, because I've got 37 videos to do tomorrow.
Okay, well, you talk to me. Well, I suppose you can't talk to me because I'm going to go and visit as well. Because
okay,
I'm going to make a mess if I don't. So, what do you want to talk about while I'm gone?
I don't know. Ask me a question.
Okay, then I won't hear the answer. What do I not want to know? What do you think about Strictly Come Down? No, British. I do want to know I can watch it later. What's the situation with Ukraine, and what's your perception of the war as it stands? Because a lot of people that are watching this from my channel might not be aware of stuff that your regular viewers will know. So tell us about this situation in Ukraine.
Goodness me. Okay, I'll go for that. So with regard to Ukraine, my goodness, it is a war of attritional chicken, whereby who can withstand all of the attrition of both personnel, equipment, and economics resources for the longest. Now, at least Ukraine has the support of a whole host of nations, whereas Russia doesn't, although they do have very meaningful support from China, which is a problem, and North Korea to some degree in terms of both personnel and equipment. So it is pretty desperate at the moment because Russia are throwing in inordinate amounts of drones and missiles on a nightly basis. And they don't have any compunction in committing war crimes. So there's a bit of an asymmetry there where Russia get an advantage over Ukraine in terms of what they can do to Ukraine, because Ukraine aren't prepared to do some of these most horrific things, and rightly so. But Russia is also a lot weaker than I think they'd led the world to believe. Their army wasn't nearly as good. They didn't have decent enough equipment in the main. But if Ukraine had been provided with more stuff earlier, and especially bigger stuff, then Russia could be in serious trouble, and would be in serious trouble. So they should have had, more jets and more long-range missiles. And they kept saber rattling the Russians by threatening nuclear warheads, which they always do, threaten with nukes, and that's essentially what keeps everyone in check. What keeps allied nations from supporting Ukraine as much as they otherwise should. And we should have learnt by now that they never come through on their threats, the Russians, really. And we impose a lot of these red lines on ourselves, which is like, oh, we can't do that because Russia might threaten us with nuclear weapons, so we can't provide these missiles or these tanks. And then it turns out that when we did provide the missiles and tanks and planes, Russia didn't do anything. So we should have done that much earlier, much more of that stuff. And anyway, point being is that Ukraine have done an insanely good job, but we need to continue supporting them to the hilt, and more so. And it's all about the US. So if Trump had come along and on January the 20th, when he was elected, on January the 21st, came out and hit Russia with massive sanctions to continue the sanctions regime that happened under Biden, and add to what the EU and the UK and Japan and Canada have been doing, then Russia would be absolutely screwed. Trump would have actually taken his followers would essentially, apart from a couple of people like Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are vehemently anti-Ukraine, essentially Trump would have taken his supporters with him no matter what he decided. So if on January the 21st he decided to support Ukraine massively, he would have had broad support to do so. In fact, he would have had more support to doing that than not doing that. And he made the wrong decision, I think, not only strategically, geopolitically for the world and for Ukraine, but he made a wrong decision for his own supporters. More of his own GOP, more of his own Republican supporters would have liked him for supporting Ukraine than liked him for being a dick about Ukraine. And he's basically been useless for a very long time, and he has got a chance to right that at the moment. But the problem for Trump is he loves strongmen. He loves other strongmen. He wants to be Putin. He wants to have Putin's control. There was a famous hot mic incident where he's speaking to Peter Doocy, or was it Steve Doocy, on a plane, where he was caught on hot mic speaking, and he was asked a question about Kim Jong-un. Is like, do you want Kim to come over, and he's like, yeah, no, I don't mind that. And Trump said something like, I like Kim Jong-un. I want his people respect him. I want my people, like when he speaks, they stand up straight or something like that. I want my people to do that, which is Trump essentially admitting. And then he actually said the same thing in an interview, actually, so it wasn't just a hot mic thing. But essentially Trump has admitted in public then that he wants to be a dictator, that he wants his people to treat him like the North Korean people treat Kim Jong-un, who's just a horrific dictator. So Trump wants to be a dictator. He looks at other dictators. He likes them. He likes Viktor Orban. That's his favorite European leader. He likes Jair Bolsonaro. He likes Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, even Kim Jong-un. These are the people he aspires to be. And so, he looks at Zelensky, who refused to give him the dirt on Biden when he and this is why Trump was impeached. So basically, the American Congress had approved a bunch of deadly weapons, Javelin, anti-tank guided missiles, and all these things to go to Ukraine back in 20 whenever. And then was it 2017 or 2019? Anyway, Trump said, no, they're not going to go until Zelensky gets me dirt on Biden and Hunter Biden. And so he tried to blackmail Zelensky, and Zelensky said no. And then Trump eventually got impeached for this. So supporters of Trump say, hey, Trump was the one that got these amazing weapons to Ukraine in the first place. You know, Trump is a supporter of Ukraine. No, it wasn't Trump. Trump stopped them. It was John McCain and actually Republicans and Congress that approved that. It went through, and he tried to stop it so he could get dirt. And Zelensky said no, and that's why Trump doesn't like Zelensky. So Trump holds a grudge, and the grudge here is that he essentially Zelensky got him impeached, or the impeachment proceedings to begin, and yeah, so he naturally doesn't like Zelensky, and he naturally likes Putin a lot more. Now he's warmed more recently to Zelensky since that ambush in the White House where him and JD Vance had a go at Zelensky, and it was really awful. But the fact that he blames Zelensky for the war, sometimes he still occasionally slips into this. Well, this was Zelensky's fault, and he should what should he have done? Just capitulated to Russia straight away? Is that what you wanted? Because that's the implication that you have to make there. So Trump's positions on the war are so infantile and naive, and just blaming Biden and blaming Zelensky for Putin invading Ukraine is just an obscene thing to think. And then he occasionally blames NATO and EU expansion. It's like he's regurgitating Russian propaganda. It's horrific. So anyway, whether we like it or not, Ukraine's future really is somewhat contingent upon what Trump and the US decide to do. Had they decided the right thing on January the 21st this year, actually, I think Ukraine could have somewhat sewed this up by now. But for 7 months, Ukrainians have died because the US has not decided to do the right thing. Now, the good news there is that has forced Europe to start doing things much more themselves for European security, which is good. And we're ramping up our own production. I mean, we're talking sadly about the military industrial complex, but when you've got the threat of Russia on your border, you need to have the ability to build weapons because you might need to use them at some point. And so this goes back to the idea that the military industrial complex, we often have conspiracy theories about how they're the ones deciding about wars and how that. No, reality is that we need of the very best weapons that our country can possibly provide. Whatever country you are, you have to have the very best weapons that your country can provide, because otherwise you are more easy to invade. It's as simple as that. And like if we want national security here, we need really good cybersecurity. Okay, it'd be weird. I bet you the people who are anti-NATO are the same people who'd be like, yeah, we should have really decent cybersecurity. We should secure our nation from cyber attacks. Yeah, I mean, everyone would agree that. I can't think that anyone would disagree with that. But if you agree that we should protect ourselves from cyber attacks, what about conventional warfare attacks? Or we shouldn't have weapons. We shouldn't have a navy and an army, but we should have cybersecurity. It's weird. Anyway, I think we should have informational security, cybersecurity, and robust kinetic security as well in our armed forces. And they need to be abiding by the law and doing things correctly and fighting wars correctly. But we need to have robust defense. Otherwise, we become weak and susceptible.
Margaret's put this up before. She's put it up again with a big question with capital letters. So, is the gas line to Europe for winter heating leverage taken off the table somehow?
So if I understand this question, I think it's going along the lines that Russia did have leverage over Europe because it supplied us with hydrocarbons, gas and oil, and it was using that as leverage. And what happens in the Nord Stream pipeline, it got closed down and then blown up. And now it's looking like it might have actually been blown up by the Ukrainians. They've arrested a bunch of people around Europe. That makes things very controversial, but actually it's probably the right thing to do, but an illegal thing to do. We can talk about the divergence of morality from legality, because there is a thing there. But actually, Russia did hold a lot of leverage over Europe. And what we've done is the EU has divested itself from, well, it's got alternative sources such as LNG, liquefied natural gas shipped over from the United States is a pretty good alternative for pipeline gas from Russia. But you still have Slovakia and Hungary that are, although they're starting to look at alternatives, they've just signed a 10-year contract with Shell and with someone else as well. But really, Viktor Orban in Hungary and Robert Fico in Slovakia are two people who love a bit of Russia, and they are the moles inside Europe. Really, it's a real bit of problem there. But yeah, there is a lot of leverage over Europe. Certain countries have done a really good job. Germany have actually done a really good job of weaning themselves off Russian dependence in a very quick fashion. There are still a number of countries that are taking in gas, and some still comes through the Netherlands and Spain, I think, as well. And then it kind of gets. The other thing that happens is Russian oil, crude oil. So crude oil is your basic oil, and then it goes to a refinery to get refined into gasoline, kerosene, petrol, diesel, kerosene, aviation fuel, whatever. So crude oil does end up going to India, and then India refines it, and then we get the refined stuff from India, and we go, we haven't got Russian oil, we've got Indian petrol. And you're like, yeah, actually it really is Russian. But I don't mind that. I don't mind that too much, because the value is being added on by India, and Russia is still having to sell that quite cheaply to India. So India have Russia over a barrel. They buy it in cheap, and that's not nearly enough for meeting what Russia needs for its budget. So anyway, it all gets a bit complicated. But you'll find that we are in Europe moving away from Russian oil, and they have they are putting legislation in to fully wean themselves off Russian hydrocarbons. But as ever, Viktor Orban and Hungary are trying to put a veto on that. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it does. That's awesome. And Mo did thank you at one point as well. So yeah, any other questions, throw them out there, because that was really cool that Mo wrote question in big letters. It was like, okay,
yeah,
this one.
that's what I said earlier. Put question in capitals, and then
we see it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, hydrocarbons. We could talk about energy. Goodness me, we can talk all night. But I really shouldn't. It's really frustrating. Donald Trump has just closed down a Rhode Island wind farm that was 80% built, and he's just shut it down because he's been lobbied by the fossil fuel industries, and he hates renewables, right? And I think it comes from his Turnberry golf course, where they built a wind farm out to sea, and he hated it, and so he hates wind. And he's also lobbied by the fossil fuel industry. So he's just closed down a wind farm, but he's also just closed down a solar farm as well. Now, this is at a time when data centers, so in order to run AI, it's really juicy. AI is not good for the environment. It's very, very energy intensive, and it needs big computing data centers that require immense amounts of water to cool, and also energy to run them. And at a time when supply and demand, then high demand, not enough supply, makes prices go up. So energy prices are going up in the US, and they need more energy. But from an ideological point of view, he's shutting down solar and wind farms that are just almost at completion. Like, there's no reason to do that. They would add to the grid. They would help to bring the prices down, and he's shutting them down just for some ideological wing nuttery. We're at a time when
I remember when sorry, I was just going to bounce off that. I remember when he came over here, and he gave a really like bizarrely stupid statement that was about 3 words about wind farms to Keir Starmer. He said that he just said you 3 adjectives that was totally pointless. Yeah. And I can't remember. Do you know what I mean? It was so weird.
He just keeps insulting wind farms like randomly the whole time.
Yeah, but he sounds like an 8-year-old. Do you know what I mean? It's
King Raccoon's made a good point on the live chat, saying oil prices are crash again tonight. I saw a rumor, a bit of geopolitical rumor here, that Iranian ships have had their transponders turned back on, which means usually when you turn your transponders off on a ship, it means you're basically transporting stuff illegally. You turn it off, no one knows where you are, and then you move some oil from here, you move it from one ship to another. You do these transshipments where you can move oil from one ship to another, and then it's no longer Iranian oil or whatever. But I saw a rumor today that Iran have turned all their transponders on, and that could mean, someone was suggesting this could mean that Donald Trump is about to lift sanctions on Iranian oil. And if he's about to lift sanctions on Iranian oil, then suddenly you've got an absolute F ton of oil hitting the markets. And if you have an F ton of oil hitting the markets, you've now got an oversupply, which brings the prices down, which is good for, obviously, energy inflation. High energy prices can drive inflation, but that's also really good for screwing Russia over. So Russia need oil prices to be high to make money off every barrel of crude oil so that they can meet their budget needs to run a war. And what we did, one of the things you might have heard of the oil price cap, is this was largely driven by the UK, actually, because we Lloyd's of London control maritime insurance. We are able to control, almost monopolize, there's almost a monopoly the UK has on maritime insurance. And so we said to our insurance companies, if any ship is transporting oil from Russia above $60 a barrel, then you will not be insured. So what that meant is that there was a price cap for everyone that was adhering to insurance that was maxed out Russian oil at $60 a barrel. So what we didn't want to do is stop Russian oil getting on a market. We didn't want to say you're not allowed to sell oil, we're going to sanction Russian oil, because then they produce so much oil that then there's not enough oil on the markets, and then that pushes prices up. And then suddenly because energy is used to do anything, build anything, it means that you'll get massive inflation. So at the beginning of the war, we were really worried about stopping Russia. What we wanted is Russia to still sell their oil, but to sell it at either a loss or a minimal profit. So you put this oil price cap on, which means you're going to still sell it. We're not going to have inflation, but you're not going to make that much money. But then they found ways around this by having ghost tanker fleets that were uninsured and would, like, you didn't know who the transponders were off, and you didn't know what flags they were under, and they were taking oil from Russia and selling it kind of on the sly. But anyway, the point is that if Iran is suddenly getting oil on the market, then that brings prices down and it screws Russia over, and that's what we like to see. But just from an energy point of view, I've been watching a number of videos on renewables. I'm a big renewable fan. I've got an electric car, I've got solar panels. Like, I am pretty obsessed with renewables. But it's interesting that you can make a case for renewables that has nothing to do with the environment. It's just to do with the particularly solar at the moment. The price of solar is going down so much. Batteries, I don't know if you know that there's a new type of sodium battery that's just coming out, which is just I think it's going to be way cheaper, and like for an electric car it can drive like 2.6 million miles or whatever. It's like batteries are coming down. You've got other countries finding like rare earth metals, like Norway, Germany's just found a whole load. And so if you're looking at where energy's going, renewables are just price competitive, although oil is going down at the moment. It's just not even from an environmental point of view, from an economic point of view, Trump is insane. You want to be like building renewables and adding to the energy mix, and so on and so forth. So renewables,
but it's interesting, isn't it? Because that's the argument that would actually hit home for a lot of people, isn't it? Because they think about the Pearce all the time.
That's it.
And that argument should be more prevalent, shouldn't it?
And so the other thing that there's a bit sly about fossil fuels is people don't realize how many subsidies fossil fuels get. And also there's something called a negative externality. So when you, in economics, when you build, so if I build widgets, right, I have my costs, right? Here are my costs to build it, and here's what I get in, and the difference between costs and income is profit, right? That's easy. But sometimes I build a widget and there are costs that aren't incurred by me. So I build a widget and I pollute a river, right? And then it kills all the life in the river. And then the council have to come along and clean up the river. And so that's allowed me to produce this widget more cheaply. So I get extra profit off polluting that river, and the taxpayer has to pay to clean up the river. So that's called a negative externality. It's an external cost to me that is not borne out by me. So what the
Right.
governments then do is say, right, if you have these negative externalities that are going to cost us, you can't do that. You can't pollute the river. We're going to fine you. So you have regulation. But then people like, say, the Republicans or usually the right wing or the libertarians don't like regulation. It's like, you shouldn't regulate. It was like, well, okay, but then they're just going to pollute. Then we've got 60-year-olds working down in mines again. So you have to regulate. Like, the free market cannot arbitrate for morality, right? The free market doesn't decide that it's bad to employ 6-year-olds. The free market doesn't give a shit. It's just like, what makes more profit? Okay, so governments have to come in and do morality. And they say, we can't have 6-year-olds working down a mine. So you have the Climbing Boys Act, the Factories Act of 1847 or whatever, and then Agricultural Gangs Act. So anyway, we regulate for morality. But the other thing, that includes the environment and health. So like smoking's an interesting one. The negative externality of that is like lung cancer. But then you've got this weird situation where actually the tax from smoking might actually cover the amount of external costs that smoking brings about and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so it gets a bit complicated. But anyway, when you look at the negative externalities of fossil fuels, things like pollution, all the oil spills, the air, asthma, all air pollution and health effects of that, when you take negative externalities into account and compare them to renewables, we are paying way loads of money to fossil fuel companies in order to make a profit. So their profits are underwritten by taxpayers covering of negative externalities, as well as actual subsidies that are given, tax breaks and this and that, loads of subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. Trump just came in, and in the big beautiful bill that he's just brought in, he's not only taken away the grants for the renewables, he's added extra tax. So he's not only said, I'm going to make it not only less easy for you to build renewables, but I'm going to tax you even more. So he's disincentivizing renewables in the US at the same time as giving. He literally said before he was elected on the campaign trail, fossil fuel industries, come and give me $1 million. If you give me $1 million, you can come and we'll work out some policy. Literally. And it's just like, okay, so you don't give a shit about the environment and you just want money.
And he's doing it at both ends, isn't he? He's doing it the fossil fuel end and the renewable end as well.
Making it easier for fossil fuels and more difficult for renewables. And you're like, this is at a time where actually forget the environment, but just from an economic energy provision point of view, you need as much energy as you can get because those data centers are freaking hungry.
And that's ideological, isn't it? And that's down to his own sense of business and how he sort of the environment he grew up in, and like his own sense of how the world works, So he's putting that into play in a very dangerous way, and it's just the way he sees the world.
And you're seeing him blow up. He blew up another Venezuelan boat today. So I think that's now 5 boats. So I don't know if you've seen this. Have you seen
I haven't seen what he did today.
Right. No. Okay. Well, have you seen it in general? Have you heard about the Venezuelan boat? So for those who don't know, the American armed forces are okay with blowing up boats full of Venezuelan civilians in international water, which is like literally an international war crime. And it's also against their own military rule book, the Americans. Like there's no way this is right. Now you might not like drug traffickers, right? You might think it's a good thing they don't exist, but you wouldn't look across the road and see, well, there's a drugs den there. I think you wouldn't find it acceptable that suddenly 3 missiles went and blew up the house across the road. So you're like, well, what if there's a baby in there? What if there was someone that wasn't a drug? How do you know? What's a due process? We have law so that you follow due process. You say, we've got some people that we suspect are drugs smugglers, so we're going to find all the evidence, then we're going to arrest them, then we're going to put them through the court process. If you just send missiles into blow up boats, then law means nothing, and there's a slippery slope. It's like, well, who else can you blow up then that you think are breaking the law? Political enemies, political opposition.
That's what ISIS do, isn't it? That ISIS is operating in those kind of rules.
Yeah, so you either adhere to the rules-based order or you don't. So, like, as much as I might not like narco, drug traffickers, like, I don't advocate for just executing them before we even know if they're definitely drug traffickers. So one of these boats, the Colombian president has just said, I think there were Colombians on board there. They weren't even Venezuelans, they were Colombians. And then, like, one boat was going in the other direction and it had 11 people on board, where if it's a drug smuggling boat, it's not going to have 11 people on board. You're going to have a couple of people and a whole bunch of blocks of cocaine. And anyway, Venezuela is not one of the main drug places. It's fentanyl across the border that comes from China and blah blah. Anyway, like there are loads of issues with this, but he's just blown up another boat today. But you're thinking, like, what's really going on here? So he wants Maduro out of Venezuela. Why are they so big on? Okay, Maduro is not a good leader. Like, he is a bad dude. Like, even Hugo Chavez was better than Maduro, and more socially minded actually for his country in terms of policy. Maduro, bad guy. But is this really about oil? Is this? Do they want to get into regime change in Venezuela? Venezuela is a massive oil producer, and like, there's a guy called Smedley Butler in the 1930s, I think it was, or 90, whenever, wrote a book. I forget what the book was called, but he's got this amazing excerpt in it. It was like, I went into this country, like he was in the army or the Marines or Navy or something. He's like, I went into this country where we sorted out the sugar plantations. I went into this country where we were protecting this, like, financial thing for the United States. I went into this country, and basically the whole excerpt is about how the armed forces is just looking after the national interests of the country, but the national interests are just business interests. And there's a case for this, right? So, that's what our Navy did in protecting ships that went across the Atlantic, right? Is protect them from pirates so that our country can make money and you can get tax income, right? So,
Yeah.
but the way that he phrased it was like, who's that? Al Capone was racketeering on 3 streets in New York or whatever it was. We were racketeering on 5 continents. It's like, so we're going around like, and I remember speaking to my mate who was quite high up in the Navy, or at least he was working for the Admiral in the Navy as a PA or something, talking about, like, what are we doing over in the Red Sea? Well, we're protecting from pirates so the trade routes can operate through Red Sea, and et cetera, et cetera. That's why we're protecting against Houthis at the moment. It's just all about trade. And it's like, so why did we go into Iraq? Was that all of, and this is where I go back for, we need robust defenses, but also we need responsible governments that don't use our armed forces to do things that I think are somewhat dubious, such as going into Iraq probably because you want the oil, taking out Libya probably because you want the oil. Why didn't we go into Zimbabwe and take out Robert Mugabe? I'll ask you the question. No oil. Like, Zimbabwe didn't have anything we wanted. Robert Mugabe, complete bastard, but there were no natural resources that were useful for us. So as much as the military-industrial complex and having a robust armed force is very, very important, it's also about using them responsibly and not going around the world trying to, exploit different countries. I mean, that's what we used to do as an empire. We'd just go around the world and say, have you got a flag? And they'd say, no. Well, we've got one. Here it is. Bosh, it's ours now. Thank you. We're having this and we're having that. And
yeah. And there are consequences to that as well, which a lot of people don't want to think about.
Yeah. War is a racket. That was it. Thank you, Margaret. War is a racket. 1935. I thought it was the 35. If I was running this, I would have brought up the excerpt for you, because I've but you can find it online. It's a great comment. That really shows you that. But then I remember writing an article on this topic and looking at the government website for what our armed forces do, and to give me the remit of our armed forces. And it is, we like to think our armed forces are going around the world doing humanitarian work, which they do, and they go in, earthquake zones and blah 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 and help out. But essentially, they're doing diplomacy on our behalf an awful lot, and it is looking after our national interests, which are economic interests. And there is a good. But you can make a good. That's not just like we're trying to exploit the world. Actually, if the Red Sea doesn't have free trade going through it, then we don't get goods. You can't buy a television from freaking Japan, right? So it is in our national interest that we have free trade that flows around the world unhindered by pirates. So that is important. But maybe invading Iraq because of weapons of mass destruction when you just want their oil is maybe not a cool thing.
Yeah.
End of rant.
Yeah, but it's a good one.
Thank you, Margaret. You got the hat to Eddie Izzard. Yeah, that flag thing was an Eddie Izzard. You're the first person, Margaret, because I've used that analogy before, and that is from an Eddie Izzard sketch. thing.
Routine. Yeah, absolutely.
But yes, we should probably bring this to some kind of end soon.
Yeah. I mean, that's cool. Yeah, because we've it's almost 3 hours, so
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's almost 2 o'clock.
Yeah. Have you got work? Well, you're going to do your videos tomorrow, aren't you?
Yeah. I have to get up when the boys get up.
I've got to get up possibly earlier than that. I'm not sure. I've got work tomorrow as well, so and I've got an open evening as well, so I've got a long day.
Oh, mate.
Yeah. I'm working Monday evenings as well now, John, which is interesting.
You've got what? Sorry, say that again.
I'm working on Monday evenings now, teaching English as well.
Oh.
So, yeah. It's all go.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, let's leave it there. I mean, biscuit time on our show I do with Dave. We always talk about biscuits, so I'll just show my biscuits to the camera because if anyone is watching because most of these people are your people, which is lovely, and it's been great seeing the chat happening. But yeah, we usually talk about the biscuit. We usually open biscuits and eat biscuits on our show, which wouldn't have been. I mean, if you'd have done that, you wouldn't have been able to talk, which would have been nonsense, wouldn't it? What's that about?
Well, I may have given you a chance to say something rather than just me banging on incessantly.
It's been brilliant. I've been dying to have Johno on my show for quite a while, on my channel for quite a while. So it's really cool. Kelly's here. That's cool. Yeah, so you've had a few extras. I know you're swimming in subscribers, but you had a few more from tonight, which is great. So
welcome to the team.
Yeah,
lovely bunch here.
Yeah, and very.
I'm really privileged to have a very loyal team of like awesome subscribers who truly are great, and I'm bowled over. And so just want to give them props.
But that's one of the amazing things about YouTube because I've got a very small channel, but we've got these regular commenters and there's a community around it, and whatever size channel you have, YouTube does give you that, and it's a lovely thing. Someone's just asked if it's hobnobs or ginger nuts. I like both of those a lot. These are digestive creams.
So before I became a vegan, because I've got multiple sclerosis, and I changed my diet to try, reading books. What's the best thing to try and deal with my MS. So I'm mainly a vegan. Occasionally have a bit of fish, and then occasionally finish what's on my boys' plates. But generally,
you say to them, you don't want that. You don't want that food.
Yeah.
I haven't finished it.
I would leave all that chicken, mate. I'd leave that. but essentially, dairy is one of the things I try and stay away from. But which is a shame because I love cheese, and B, chocolate hobnobs. I do miss a chocolate hobnob. It's the number one biscuit of all time.
They are quite incredible. Someone just said Fox's creams. We are getting towards Christmas, and the boxes of Fox's biscuits, oh my god, they're amazing. But apologies if you're listening to this thing and I don't want to hear about this, Gareth, because I'm vegan and you're taking a piss.
And quite frankly, I was just listening to oil prices and the impact of negative externalities on, and now you're talking about biscuits. Like, what? Jesus, mate.
And now they're joining in. I tell you what, it's funny because my channel is mostly about books, and when we do our live streams, if we start talking about books, they switch off, and we start talking about biscuits, the numbers go up like crazy. So people love biscuits, Johno. It's just one of those things, and it's happening now. Look, it's happening with your people. Look.
That's because they're bored of me talking about. They've heard me. Everything I've said tonight, they've heard it all already.
Your next show, they're going to be talking about biscuits for hours. They're going to be like, "Look, guys, I'm trying to talk about Ukraine here," and they're going, "Well, what kind of biscuits are happening in Ukraine?"
Yeah, true.
Doris loves bourbons.
I bet she does because I don't. Yeah, Bloody Doris.
Yeah, seems like a type.
She always comes around here trying to offer me bourbons, knowing full well I don't like them. Sod off, Doris. Get back to you're supposed to be upstairs. You should be just. You're not even allowed downstairs now. Ivan says you're not allowed down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Poor old Doris.
I'm not supposed to eat those biscuits. I've got a bunch of diabetic biscuits I'm supposed to eat, but I don't talk about that on the channel
Okay.
because
That's not.
it's not right. What's this? Starsky's streams.
So so Starsky, Operator Starsky, is a famous Ukrainian YouTuber. He used to be a press officer in the Ukrainian army, and he does now YouTubing. But yes, food. Yeah, last I was on, I did a 12.5-hour live stream the other day for campaign fundraising, and with Jonathan Fink, I took about 4.5 hours off in the middle because I had to go and go to cinema. But
what did you see?
I saw I Swear, which is
we're seeing that next week.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Yeah, really, really, really good. Yes, and he was just eating a big sausage, so that sounds rude. He was.
Anyway, you made that rude. I imagine the sausage.
You imagine an actual sausage, and now there are wrong images in your head. Yeah, sorry.
Well, you and your penis fetish,
like that took it from like euphemism to like actual. You can't do that. You've crossed the line there. Like we can have a laugh about euphemisms. No, what's he talking about? Is he talking about this or that? And you just went.
Yeah. I made the line thicker. That's what I did.
Yeah, you're wrong.
Now that's even dirtier, isn't it?
You're wrong.
I gave the line more girth.
Yes. Stop now. If you, I don't know if it's anything you want, but in next time, I'm feeling like I'm quite verbose, which is actually, let's face it, every day. If you fancy having another chat, just hit me up, mate, sometime in the future when I've got more to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. I am definitely going to do that. I've had a great night, and I think everyone's enjoyed it, which is cool. So yeah, please come back and have a great sleep in a minute. We're now at 2:00 in the morning.
Jesus.
Thanks everyone for listening. And if you like my little small part of the evening, then please subscribe.
You don't have to watch his videos, just subscribe and just
yeah. I don't give a shit if you're watching my videos.
Yeah.
That's the thing with YouTube. 10%, I think it is 10. You should expect 10% of your subs to watch.
I had 97% of my subs watch because of the quality of my content.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That's a fact.
Yeah. Is that true?
No, I haven't got a clue.
Yeah, fake news.
Yeah, fake news, disinformation. Yes, thanks, mate. I appreciate that. Keep me on like when you stop recording, and I'll say my proper goodbyes to you in person.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for everybody. I'm gonna make sure I do this properly because last time I did this, I didn't even say goodbye to the person that I was chatting with, and it was just went. And I've been doing this for ages now, but I did it wrong. It's because the thing has changed. What it looks like. So Lucky Strikes just bought some biscuits. Anyway, thanks a lot, everybody, and see you later. End the stream. Right.